The eastern fringe of the galaxy had always been a frontier region for the expanding Imperium of Man, a vast expanse of space where exploration fleets pushed the boundaries of human knowledge into the void. During the 35th millennium, one such expedition would make a discovery that would reshape the balance of power in this distant corner of the galaxy, though none aboard those Imperial vessels could have predicted the consequences of their findings. The Tau homeworld of Tau was first encountered by an Imperial exploration fleet operating under the auspices of the Adeptus Mechanicus, their auger arrays detecting the telltale signatures of a life-bearing world orbiting a stable star. The planet appeared unremarkable at first scan, a terrestrial world with standard atmospheric composition, reasonable gravity, and abundant water. What drew the expedition's attention was not the world itself, but the primitive electromagnetic emissions detected from its surface, indicating the presence of a developing species. Initial orbital reconnaissance revealed a world dominated by vast grasslands and rolling plains, broken by mountain ranges and scattered forests. The twin moons that hung in Tau's sky created complex tidal patterns that had carved intricate river systems across the continents, while the planet's axial tilt generated pronounced seasonal variations that would prove crucial to the development of its inhabitants. The Imperial survey teams noted the abundance of natural resources, from mineral deposits in the mountainous regions to the fertile soils of the Great Plains that supported extensive ecosystems. The species the Imperial explorers discovered was bipedal and roughly humanoid, though distinctly alien in appearance. These early Tau possessed blue-gray skin, cloven hooves, and a distinctive facial structure that would later be classified by Imperial xenobiologists as indicative of herbivorous evolutionary origins. The primitive Tau were organized into numerous tribal groups scattered across the planet's surface, each controlling territory around water sources and grazing lands suitable for the domesticated animals that formed the backbone of their nomadic lifestyle. Imperial assessment teams deployed to the surface documented a species that had achieved basic tool use and primitive metallurgy, but remained locked in a pre-industrial state of development. The various Tau tribes demonstrated clear territorial behaviors, engaging in regular conflicts over resources and grazing rights. These early observations noted the Tau's natural aptitude for organization and their tendency to form complex social hierarchies, traits that Imperial analysts cataloged as potentially useful for future exploitation. The Tau tribes exhibited remarkable diversity in their cultural practices and technological development, despite their shared biological heritage. Some had developed sophisticated astronomical observations, tracking the movements of their twin moons with remarkable precision, and using this knowledge to predict seasonal changes crucial for their nomadic migrations. Others had begun experimenting with permanent settlements, constructing the first crude cities near reliable water sources, and attempting to transition from purely nomadic lifestyles to more sedentary agricultural practices. The tribal warfare that characterized this period was not the random violence of savage species, but rather a complex system of ritualized conflicts and territorial disputes. Different tribes had developed distinct fighting styles and weapons technologies, from the mounted warriors of the plains who fought with primitive firearms and bladed weapons, to the mountain clans who specialized in defensive tactics using the natural terrain to their advantage. These conflicts served as a crucible for technological and tactical innovation, driving the development of increasingly sophisticated weapons and military strategies. Before the Imperial expedition could establish permanent monitoring stations or begin the process of compliance, an unprecedented astronomical phenomenon occurred that would alter the course of Tau history forever. Massive warp storms erupted throughout the Tau system, creating violent distortions in space-time that made navigation impossible and cut off all contact with the outside galaxy. These storms were unlike anything in Imperial records, displaying patterns and intensities that defied conventional understanding of warp phenomena. The isolation was complete and absolute. Imperial vessels caught within the system's boundaries found themselves trapped, their navigators unable to plot courses through the chaotic warp currents that surrounded every possible exit route. Those ships that attempted to breach the storm barriers simply vanished, their fates unknown. The few vessels that managed to escape the system's edge before the storms fully manifested carried reports of the phenomenon back to Imperial Command, but any attempts at rescue or investigation proved impossible. For 6,000 years, the Tau system remained cut off from the galaxy, a pocket of space-time isolated by forces that Imperial scientists could neither explain nor overcome. During this period of enforced solitude, the Tau species would undergo transformations that would have been impossible under Imperial oversight. Free from external interference, they followed their own evolutionary path, developing technologies and social structures that diverged dramatically from human norms. The early centuries of isolation saw the continuation and intensification of the tribal conflicts that had characterized pre-contact Tau society. Without the stabilizing influence of Imperial intervention or the threat of external enemies, the various Tau factions turned their energies towards settling ancient grudges and expanding their territorial holdings. This period, which would later be remembered in Tau historical records as the Montau or the Terror, represented the darkest chapter in their species' development. The Montau was characterized by unprecedented levels of warfare and technological innovation driven by military necessity. Tribal confederations formed and dissolved in rapid succession as alliances shifted based on immediate tactical advantages. The development of increasingly deadly weapons accelerated, with Tau engineers creating primitive pulse weapons and experimental aircraft in their desperate attempts to gain advantages over their rivals. Cities that had taken generations to build were destroyed in single campaigns, their populations scattered or absorbed into the conquering tribes. The planet's geography played a crucial role in shaping these conflicts. The Great Plains that covered much of Tau's surface provided ideal battlegrounds for mobile warfare, while the mountain ranges served as natural fortresses for defensive campaigns. The complex river systems created by the Twin Moon's tidal influences became strategic corridors, with control over major waterways determining the success or failure of entire tribal confederations. Seasonal variations forced armies to adapt their campaigns to the planet's natural rhythms, with winter months often bringing temporary truces as tribes focused on survival rather than conquest. The Twin Moons themselves became central to Tau military planning and cultural development. Their gravitational effects created predictable patterns in everything from tidal flows to atmospheric pressure, information that skilled Tau commanders learned to exploit in their campaigns. The larger moon's influence on the planet's magnetic field also affected early Tau navigation technologies, forcing the development of alternative methods for long-range travel and communication. As the Montau continued, the environmental pressures of constant warfare began to reshape Tau society in fundamental ways. The need for rapid technological advancement drove the emergence of specialized castes within tribal structures, with individuals dedicating themselves entirely to weapons development, tactical planning, or resource management. These early specializations would eventually evolve into the rigid caste system that would define mature Tau civilization, but during the Terror period, they remained fluid and pragmatic responses to immediate survival needs. The escalating conflicts also drove innovations in Tau's social organization and communication technologies. Tribal leaders developed increasingly sophisticated methods for coordinating large-scale military operations, creating the first primitive versions of the command and control systems that would later characterize Tau military doctrine. The need to maintain contact across vast distances led to experiments with electromagnetic communication devices, laying the groundwork for the advanced communications networks that would eventually unite the planet. Despite the violence and destruction of the Montau, this period also saw remarkable advances in Tau understanding of their world and their own capabilities. The constant pressure of warfare accelerated technological development by centuries, forcing innovations that might otherwise have taken millennia to achieve. The Tau learned to harness their planet's resources with increasing efficiency, developing industrial techniques and manufacturing processes that would serve as the foundation for their later technological achievements. The geological richness of Tau provided the raw materials necessary for this rapid advancement. Extensive mineral deposits in the mountain ranges supplied metals for weapons and tools, while the fertile plains supported the agricultural systems needed to feed growing populations. The planet's stable geological structure allowed for the construction of increasingly sophisticated manufacturing facilities, even as the surface battles raged around them. The Montau had reached its most devastating crescendo when the impossible occurred. Across the war-torn surface of Tau, witnesses reported the simultaneous appearance of beings unlike any seen before in Tau society. These newcomers possessed the familiar blue-gray skin and basic physiological structure of their species, but carried themselves with an otherworldly presence that seemed to command immediate attention and respect. Most striking was the diamond-shaped organ that protruded from their foreheads, pulsing with a subtle bioluminescence that appeared to shift in response to their emotional states. The Ethereals, as they would come to be known, materialized at crucial moments during the most savage battles of the Terror period. Historical records from this time, though fragmented and often contradictory, consistently describe scenes where these mysterious figures would walk directly into active battlefields with no apparent concern for their safety. Pulse rifle fire would cease mid-burst, blade weapons would halt in mid-swing, and entire armies would fall silent as the Ethereals approached the front lines of opposing forces. What transpired during these encounters defied rational explanation. Hardened Tau warriors who had spent their entire lives locked in brutal tribal warfare would suddenly lay down their weapons upon hearing the Ethereals speak. The exact nature of their words was rarely recorded, but survivors consistently reported an overwhelming sense of clarity and purpose that replaced the rage and bloodlust that had driven them moments before. The diamond-shaped organ in each Ethereal's forehead would pulse more intensely during these speeches, though whether this was a conscious action or an involuntary response remained unclear. The pacification process was not instantaneous across the planet, but rather spread in waves from the locations where Ethereals first appeared. Tribal leaders who had been mortal enemies for generations found themselves sitting at negotiating tables, working out territorial agreements and resource-sharing arrangements that would have been unthinkable during the height of the Montau. The speed with which these accords were reached and implemented suggested a fundamental shift in Tau psychology that went beyond simple war weariness. As the fighting subsided, the Ethereals began articulating a philosophical framework that would reshape Tau civilization entirely. The concept they introduced was deceptively simple yet profoundly transformative: the Tava, or greater good. This philosophy proposed that individual desires and tribal loyalties were secondary to the collective welfare of the entire species. The Ethereals taught that every Tau had a role to play in advancing their civilization, and that personal fulfillment could only be achieved through service to this larger purpose. The greater good was not merely an abstract concept, but a practical framework for organizing society. The Ethereals identified 5 distinct paths through which Tau could serve the collective good, each corresponding to natural aptitudes and inclinations they claimed to observe within the population. These paths would evolve into the rigid caste system that would define Tau society for millennia to come, with each caste assigned specific roles and responsibilities that complemented the others. The fire caste emerged from the warrior traditions that had dominated the Montau period. Rather than abandoning military pursuits entirely, the Ethereals channeled the Tau's proven combat abilities toward the defense and expansion of their unified civilization. Fire caste members retained their weapons training and tactical knowledge, but their purpose shifted from tribal conquest to the protection of all Tau. The caste's organization drew heavily from the most successful military structures of the Terror period, incorporating the command hierarchies and specialized roles that had proven effective during the tribal wars. The Earth caste encompassed those Tau who had demonstrated aptitude for construction, manufacturing, and technological innovation during the conflicts. The engineers and weaponsmiths who had created increasingly sophisticated tools of war found their skills redirected toward building the infrastructure of a peaceful society. Earth cast workshops began producing agricultural equipment, construction materials, and the basic components of what would eventually become advanced Tau technology. Their early projects included the reconstruction of cities destroyed during the Montau and the establishment of manufacturing centers that could support a growing population. The aircast drew from Tau, who had shown particular skill with the primitive aircraft developed during the later stages of the Terror period. These individuals possessed not only technical knowledge of flight systems, but also the spatial awareness and quick reflexes necessary for aerial operations. Under Ethereal guidance, the aircast began developing more sophisticated flying vehicles and establishing the transportation networks that would connect the scattered Tau settlements across their homeworld's vast territories. The watercast incorporated those Tau who had served as negotiators, traders, and diplomatic envoys during the brief truces and alliance formations of the Montau. Their understanding of different tribal cultures and their ability to facilitate communication between disparate groups made them natural administrators and external representatives for the unified Tau society. Water caste members took charge of resource distribution, inter-settlement communications, and the delicate process of integrating former enemies into cooperative relationships. The ethereal caste remained separate from and superior to all others, claiming the right to guide and direct Tau society based on their unique understanding of the greater good. They established themselves as the ultimate arbiters of disputes between castes and the final authority on all matters affecting the collective welfare of the species. The Ethereals' mysterious origins and their demonstrated ability to end the Montau gave their claims to leadership a legitimacy that few Tau questioned. The caste system was not merely a social organization, but a comprehensive restructuring of Tau identity itself. Each caste developed its own customs, training methods, and internal hierarchies that reflected their specific functions within the greater whole. Inter-caste marriages were forbidden, ensuring that the specialized traits and knowledge of each group would be preserved and refined through successive generations. This genetic and cultural isolation would eventually lead to subtle physical differences between the castes, with each developing characteristics that enhance their ability to perform their designated roles. The unification process required more than philosophical conversion. It demanded practical solutions to the material problems created by generations of warfare. The Ethereals coordinated massive reconstruction efforts that drew upon the specialized skills of each caste. Earth caste engineers designed new cities that incorporated lessons learned from the defensive structures of the Montau period, while fire caste veterans provided security for construction crews working in areas where tribal tensions remained high. Air caste pilots established supply routes between settlements, and water caste administrators managed the complex logistics of feeding and housing populations displaced by the conflicts. The technological advancement that accompanied unification was remarkable in both its pace and its direction. Rather than simply rebuilding what had been destroyed, Tau engineers began developing entirely new approaches to energy generation, materials science, and weapons technology. The pulse weapons that had emerged during the Terror period underwent rapid refinement, with Earth caste workshops producing increasingly sophisticated versions that would eventually become the signature armaments of Tau military forces. The development of these weapons systems reflected the Tau's pragmatic approach to technology. Rather than pursuing innovation for its own sake, Earth caste engineers focused on creating tools that would serve the greater good's objectives. Pulse weapons offered significant advantages over the projectile weapons that had dominated Montau conflicts, providing greater accuracy and stopping power, while requiring less maintenance and ammunition. The electromagnetic principles underlying pulse technology also opened possibilities for other applications, from industrial equipment to communication systems. Spacecraft development began almost immediately after unification, driven by the Tau's growing awareness of their isolation within the warp storms that surrounded their system. Earth-cast engineers studied the wreckage of Imperial vessels that had been trapped when the storms first appeared, reverse engineering basic propulsion and life support systems while developing uniquely Tau approaches to space travel. These early spacecraft were crude by the standards that would later emerge, but they represented crucial first steps toward breaking free from their homeworld's constraints. The Ethereals promoted space exploration not merely as a technological challenge, but as a fundamental expression of the greater good. They taught that the Tau's destiny lay among the stars, and that the species could only achieve its full potential by spreading their philosophy and way of life to other worlds. This expansionist ideology provided the motivation for the massive resource investments required to develop spacefaring capabilities from essentially nothing. The first successful orbital flights occurred within decades of unification, using spacecraft that combined salvaged Imperial components with indigenous Tau innovations. These early missions focused on establishing communications, satellites, and orbital manufacturing facilities that could support more ambitious projects. The twin moons of Tau became testing grounds for life support systems and zero-gravity construction techniques, with Tau engineers learning to work in space environments through direct experimentation. As spacecraft technology matured, reconnaissance missions began venturing to the edges of the Tau system, probing the warp storms that had isolated them for millennia. These expeditions discovered that the storm's intensity had begun to diminish, creating occasional gaps that might allow passage to the wider galaxy. The discovery that their isolation was ending prompted accelerated preparations for what would become the first sphere expansion. The planning for interstellar colonization drew upon every aspect of Tau society and demonstrated the effectiveness of their caste-based organization. Firecast strategists analyzed the limited data available about nearby star systems, identifying potential targets for colonization based on resource availability and defensive considerations. Earth-cast engineers designed the spacecraft and equipment necessary for establishing settlements on alien worlds. Aircast pilots trained for extended deep space missions that would push their skills and equipment to absolute limits. Watercast administrators developed protocols for managing colonial populations and maintaining contact with the homeworld across interstellar distances. The Ethereals provided the philosophical framework that transformed these practical preparations into a sacred mission. They proclaimed that the greater good demanded the expansion of Tau civilization beyond their homeworld, arguing that their species had a responsibility to bring order and prosperity to the chaotic galaxy beyond their borders. This ideological foundation gave the colonization effort a sense of purpose that went beyond mere territorial expansion or resource acquisition. The first interstellar missions launched during what would later be designated the beginning of the first sphere expansion. These expeditions targeted nearby star systems that showed promise for supporting Tau colonies, with each mission carefully planned to maximize the chances of successful settlement. The spacecraft carried not only colonists and equipment, but also the complete cultural and technological heritage of unified Tau civilization, ensuring that new colonies could develop the full range of capabilities necessary for independent survival. Viorla was among the first systems successfully colonized, its hot, desert-like primary world presenting challenges that pushed Tau adaptation capabilities to their limits. The colonists who established the first settlements there developed techniques for surviving in extreme heat that would prove valuable in later expansion efforts. The planet's harsh conditions also drove innovations in environmental control systems and resource extraction methods that enhanced overall Tau technological capabilities. Borkin became the center of Tau's scientific and technological development, its colonists focusing on research and development activities that supported the broader expansion effort. The planet's stable conditions and abundant natural resources made it ideal for establishing the advanced manufacturing facilities and research institutions that would drive continued Tau advancement. Borkin's contributions to pulse weapon technology and spacecraft design became crucial elements in the success of subsequent colonization missions. Sassia emerged as a major population center and military stronghold, its strategic location making it a natural hub for coordinating expansion activities throughout the growing Tau sphere of influence. The planet's colonists developed the logistical systems and military doctrines that would enable the Tau to maintain control over their expanding territory while continuing to push outward into unexplored regions. Daleth became the commercial and administrative center of the expanding Tau Empire, its colonists specializing in the trade and diplomatic activities necessary for managing relationships between the growing number of Tau colonies. The planet's role as a communications hub made it crucial for maintaining the unity of purpose that the Ethereals considered essential for the greater good's continued advancement. Each of these core sept worlds developed its own character and specializations, while maintaining absolute loyalty to the greater good and the ethereal caste's leadership. The success of these initial colonies proved that Tau civilization could adapt to alien environments while preserving the essential elements of their unified culture and caste-based organization. The establishment of the core sept worlds during the First Sphere expansion created the foundation for unprecedented technological advancement within Tau civilization. The diverse environments and resource bases of these new colonies provided Earth caste engineers with opportunities to develop specialized equipment and weapon systems that would have been impossible on Tau alone. The harsh desert conditions of Viorla demanded innovations in heat dissipation and energy efficiency, while the stable industrial base of Borkin allowed for large-scale manufacturing and testing of experimental technologies. The development of pulse weaponry represented the most significant breakthrough in Tau military technology during this period. The basic principles had emerged during the Montau conflicts, but the advanced manufacturing capabilities of the Sept worlds enabled Earth caste engineers to refine these weapons into the sophisticated systems that would define Tau military doctrine. The pulse rifle became the standard infantry weapon, utilizing electromagnetic acceleration to propel bursts of plasma at targets with devastating effect. Unlike the crude projectile weapons of earlier eras, pulse rifles generated their ammunition from compact power cells, eliminating the logistical burden of carrying traditional ammunition while providing superior penetrating power against armored targets. The electromagnetic pulse technology underlying these weapon systems opened entirely new avenues for Tau engineering development. Earth caste workshops began experimenting with scaled-up versions of pulse generators, creating the heavy pulse cannons that would eventually arm Tau vehicles and fortifications. The same principles that accelerated plasma bursts could be adapted for industrial applications, leading to advanced manufacturing processes that dramatically increased production efficiency across all Sept worlds. Anti-gravity technology emerged from Tau attempts to understand and improve upon the Imperial spacecraft components they had salvaged during their isolation period. Earth caste engineers discovered that certain rare Earth elements found in abundance on Borkin could be processed into materials that exhibited unusual interactions with gravitational fields. By incorporating these materials into specially designed field generators, Tau engineers created the first crude gravitic drives that could provide limited lift and propulsion capabilities. The initial anti-gravity systems were bulky and energy-intensive, requiring massive power sources that limited their practical applications. However, the potential advantages of gravitic technology drove intensive research efforts across multiple Sept worlds. Viorla's extreme conditions proved ideal for testing heat-resistant components, while Sassia's military facilities provided secure environments for experimenting with potentially dangerous field configurations. Within decades, Tau engineers had developed compact gravitic drives capable of lifting substantial loads while consuming manageable amounts of power. The breakthrough that made widespread use of anti-gravity technology possible came from an unexpected source: the study of Tau physiology and the unique properties of their bone structure. Earth caste biologists discovered that certain compounds naturally present in Tau skeletal systems exhibited similar gravitational interactions to the processed materials used in their early drives. By synthesizing these biological compounds and incorporating them into mechanical systems, engineers created hybrid biomechanical gravitic drives that were both more efficient and more responsive than purely mechanical alternatives. These advances in anti-gravity technology enabled the development of the first crisis battlesuits, revolutionary combat systems that would transform Tau military capabilities. The crisis battlesuit concept emerged from Firecast's tactical analysis of the challenges faced during the early colonization efforts. Traditional infantry, even when equipped with advanced pulse weapons, proved vulnerable to the various threats encountered on alien worlds. The hostile environments of many target systems demanded protection that conventional armor could not provide, while the diverse nature of potential enemies required weapon systems more flexible than standard infantry equipment could offer. The first crisis battlesuit prototypes were essentially powered armor systems, enhanced with basic gravitic drives that allowed limited flight capability. These early suits were crude and unreliable, with pilots often struggling to control the complex systems while maintaining combat effectiveness. However, the fundamental concept proved sound. A single warrior equipped with a crisis suit could engage multiple enemies across varied terrain while maintaining the mobility necessary to exploit tactical opportunities or withdraw from overwhelming opposition. Firecast engineers worked closely with Earthcast designers to refine the crisis battlesuit concept through successive generations of prototypes. The suit's life support systems drew upon the environmental control technology developed for spacecraft, while their weapon systems incorporated the most advanced pulse technology available. The gravitic drives were integrated with sophisticated targeting computers that could compensate for the complex motion dynamics involved in aerial combat, allowing pilots to engage enemies accurately while maneuvering in 3 dimensions. The development of crisis battlesuits demanded fundamental changes in Firecast training and organization. Traditional infantry tactics were inadequate for managing warriors who could move freely through aerial space while engaging targets at extended ranges. Firecast academies began developing entirely new doctrinal frameworks that emphasized the unique capabilities these suits provided while addressing their limitations and vulnerabilities. The hunter-cadre structure emerged as the primary organizational unit for crisis battlesuit operations. Each hunter-cadre consisted of multiple crisis teams supported by conventional infantry and specialized equipment tailored to specific mission requirements. This flexible organization allowed Firecast commanders to adapt their forces to the diverse challenges encountered during expansion operations, while maintaining the coordination necessary for complex multi-unit engagements. The hunter-cadre concept reflected deeper changes in Tau military philosophy that accompanied their technological advancement. The traditional emphasis on massed infantry formations gave way to more sophisticated approaches that leveraged the Tau's growing technological superiority. Rather than simply overwhelming enemies through numerical advantage, Firecast doctrine began emphasizing precision strikes, superior mobility, and the intelligent application of advanced weapon systems. 2 fundamental tactical philosophies emerged to guide crisis battlesuit operations and broader Firecast strategy. Kauyan, the way of the patient hunter, emphasized careful preparation, detailed reconnaissance, and the methodical elimination of enemy capabilities through precisely timed strikes. This approach drew upon traditional Tau hunting practices adapted for military application, with crisis teams positioned to exploit enemy weaknesses while avoiding direct confrontation with superior forces. Montka, the way of the killing blow, represented the opposite tactical extreme: rapid, decisive strikes designed to eliminate enemy command structures and critical assets before organized resistance could develop. Montka operations required extensive intelligence gathering and precise timing, with crisis teams conducting coordinated attacks that would cripple enemy forces through the simultaneous elimination of key targets. Both tactical philosophies required supporting equipment and organizational structures that could provide the intelligence, mobility, and firepower necessary for their successful implementation. The development of the Devilfish transport addressed the mobility requirements of both Koyan and Montka operations. These gravitic vehicles could rapidly deploy fire-cast infantry to critical positions while providing fire support through integrated pulse weaponry. The Devilfish's anti-gravity propulsion allowed it to traverse terrain that would challenge conventional vehicles while maintaining the speed necessary for rapid deployment and extraction operations. The Devilfish represented a significant advancement in Tau vehicle technology, incorporating lessons learned from Crisis battlesuit development while addressing the specific requirements of infantry transport operations. Its gravitic drives were optimized for carrying substantial loads over extended distances, while its armor protection was designed to withstand the various threats encountered during deployment operations. The vehicle's pulse carbine arrays provided defensive firepower without compromising its primary transport function. Hammerhead gunships evolved from the same technological foundation as the Devilfish, but were optimized for direct combat rather than transport operations. These vehicles mounted heavy pulse cannons or specialized anti-armor weapon systems that could engage enemy vehicles and fortifications from extended ranges. The Hammerhead's gravitic propulsion provided the mobility necessary to exploit tactical opportunities, while its advanced targeting systems ensured accurate fire even while maneuvering at high speeds. The development of Hammerhead gunships required innovations in power generation and distribution systems that could support the energy requirements of heavy pulse weapons while maintaining gravitic flight capability. Earth-cast engineers developed compact fusion reactors specifically designed for vehicle applications, providing the substantial power output necessary for sustained combat operations. These reactors incorporated safety systems that would prevent catastrophic failures even under battle damage conditions. The integration of advanced battlesuit technology continued beyond the initial Crisis suit development, with Earth-cast engineers creating specialized variants designed for specific tactical roles. Stealth suits emerged from attempts to combine Crisis suit mobility with reconnaissance capabilities, incorporating advanced sensor systems and limited cloaking technology that allowed small teams to gather intelligence deep within enemy territory. These suits sacrificed some of the Crisis suit's firepower and armor protection in exchange for enhanced stealth capabilities and extended operational endurance. Broadside battlesuits represented the opposite design philosophy, maximizing firepower and armor protection while accepting reduced mobility. These heavy suits were designed to provide long-range fire support for hunter-cadre operations, mounting weapon systems powerful enough to engage enemy vehicles and fortifications at extreme ranges. The broadside's gravitic systems were optimized for stability rather than maneuverability, allowing pilots to maintain accurate fire while absorbing return fire from enemy forces. The establishment of fire-cast academies on Viorla marked a crucial development in Tau military organization and doctrine. The planet's harsh desert environment provided ideal conditions for testing both equipment and personnel under extreme stress, while its isolation from major population centers ensured that training activities would not interfere with civilian operations. The academies developed comprehensive programs that prepared fire-cast warriors for the diverse challenges they would encounter during expansion operations. The Viorla academies established the ranking system that would define fire-cast hierarchy for millennia. The Shasui rank represented experienced warriors who had demonstrated competence in basic combat operations and showed potential for leadership responsibilities. These individuals typically served as team leaders within hunter cadres, coordinating the actions of small units while maintaining their own combat effectiveness. Shasui training emphasized tactical flexibility and the ability to adapt quickly to changing battlefield conditions. Shasva represented the next level of fire-cast leadership, encompassing veterans who had proven their ability to command multiple teams in complex operations. These officers typically led entire hunter cadres, coordinating the actions of crisis teams, infantry units, and supporting vehicles in pursuit of strategic objectives. Shasver training included extensive study of Koyan and Montka tactical principles, preparing these leaders to select and implement appropriate strategies based on mission requirements and enemy capabilities. The Shassel rank represented the highest level of fire caste field command, encompassing officers responsible for coordinating multiple hunter cadres in large-scale operations. These commanders required comprehensive understanding of both tactical and strategic considerations, balancing immediate battlefield requirements against broader campaign objectives. Shassel training included exposure to water caste diplomatic protocols and earth caste logistical systems, ensuring that senior fire caste officers could effectively coordinate with other castes during complex operations. The Academy system on Viorla developed specialized training programs for each type of battle suit and vehicle system in fire caste service. Crisis suit pilots underwent extensive simulation training that prepared them for the complex three-dimensional combat environment they would encounter in actual operations. These programs emphasized the importance of teamwork and coordination, as individual crisis suits were most effective when operating as part of coordinated teams that could provide mutual support and concentrate firepower against priority targets. Stealth suit training focused on reconnaissance and infiltration techniques that took advantage of these suits' unique capabilities. Pilots learned to operate independently for extended periods while gathering intelligence and conducting precision strikes against high-value targets. The psychological demands of stealth operations required additional preparation, as pilots often operated alone or in very small teams without the support structures available to conventional units. Broadside suit training emphasized the technical skills necessary to operate complex heavy weapons systems while maintaining the situational awareness required for effective fire support operations. These pilots learned to coordinate their actions with forward observers and tactical commanders, providing accurate long-range fires that could influence battles across extended areas without endangering friendly forces. The technological advancement that accompanied fire caste development extended beyond weapons and vehicles to encompass the supporting systems necessary for effective military operations. Advanced communication systems allowed hunter cadre commanders to coordinate complex operations across vast distances while maintaining real-time awareness of battlefield conditions. These systems incorporated encryption protocols that prevented enemy interception while providing the bandwidth necessary for transmitting detailed tactical information and sensor data. Logistical systems evolved to support the complex maintenance requirements of advanced battle suit and vehicle technology. Mobile repair facilities could be deployed with hunter cadres, allowing field maintenance of gravitic drives, pulse weapons, and life support systems without requiring return to major bases. These capabilities proved crucial during extended operations in hostile territory where traditional supply lines might be compromised or unavailable. The integration of fire caste military capabilities with the broader objectives of Tau expansion required careful coordination with other castes and adherence to the strategic guidance provided by the Ethereals. Fire caste doctrine emphasized the importance of minimizing collateral damage and civilian casualties, reflecting the greater good's emphasis on bringing order and prosperity to conquered territories rather than simply destroying enemy forces. The success of the First Sphere expansion had transformed the Tau from an isolated species into a growing interstellar power, but the Ethereals recognized that their initial colonies represented only the beginning of their destiny among the stars. The establishment of the core sept worlds provided the industrial base and population necessary for more ambitious expansion efforts, while the technological advances achieved during the First Sphere had given the Tau military capabilities that could compete with the various threats they would encounter in the wider galaxy. The time had come to push beyond the relatively safe systems they had already claimed and venture into regions where they would inevitably encounter the galaxy's dominant powers. The Second Sphere expansion launched with careful preparation that reflected lessons learned from the initial colonization efforts. Rather than simply targeting the nearest habitable systems, Tau exploration fleets conducted extensive reconnaissance missions to identify systems that offered strategic value beyond mere resource extraction or population centers. The expansion planners sought systems that could serve as forward bases for future operations, defensive strongpoints that could protect existing colonies, or locations that would provide access to previously unexplored regions of space. The Damocles Gulf region emerged as a primary target for Second Sphere operations due to its strategic position relative to existing Tau territory and its apparent abundance of habitable worlds. Initial reconnaissance missions revealed numerous systems containing planets suitable for Tau colonization, while the region's location offered potential access to trade routes and territories that extended far beyond the Tau's current sphere of influence. The Gulf's complex stellar geography also provided natural defensive advantages, with nebulae and asteroid fields that could serve as barriers against potential enemies while offering concealment for Tau military operations. Earthcast survey teams deployed to the Damocles Gulf discovered worlds that presented entirely new challenges for Tau colonization efforts. Unlike the relatively straightforward environments encountered during the First Sphere, many Gulf systems contain planets with complex ecosystems, unusual atmospheric compositions, or geological instabilities that required innovative solutions. These challenges drove further technological advancement as Earthcast engineers developed specialized equipment for terraforming operations, atmospheric processing, and seismic stabilization. The first major Imperial contact occurred when a Tau exploration fleet encountered an Imperial Navy patrol squadron conducting routine reconnaissance operations along the outer edges of the Damocles Gulf. The Imperial vessels, operating under standard protocols for investigating unknown contacts, attempted to establish communication with the Tau ships using standard Imperial Vox frequencies and identification codes. The Tau fleet, lacking any knowledge of Imperial communication protocols or languages, interpreted the Imperial signals as potentially hostile and responded according to their own first contact procedures. The initial engagement was brief but significant in its implications for future Tau-Imperial relations. The Imperial Patrol Squadron consisted of 3 escort vessels conducting a standard sweep pattern when their auger arrays detected the distinctive energy signatures of Tau gravitic drives. The Imperial captains, following established protocols for encountering unknown spacecraft, moved to intercept while broadcasting identification demands and warnings to withdraw from Imperial space. The Tau Fleet Commander, operating underwater, cast diplomatic guidelines for first contact situations, attempted to establish peaceful communication while maintaining defensive formations that would protect his ships from potential attack. The language barrier proved insurmountable through standard communication channels, and the increasing proximity of the two fleets created a tactical situation that both sides interpreted as potentially threatening. When the Imperial squadron moved to close-range scanning positions, the Tau commander interpreted this as preparation for an attack and ordered his escorts to adopt combat formations. The Imperial captains, observing the Tau ship's movement patterns and energy signatures, concluded that they were facing a potentially hostile alien force and requested reinforcements while preparing for engagement. The first shots were fired when an Imperial escort attempted to disable a Tau vessel's engines using targeted lance strikes, prompting immediate retaliation from the entire Tau fleet. The battle demonstrated both the capabilities and limitations of Tau naval technology when confronted with Imperial vessels. The Tau ship's gravitic drives provided superior maneuverability compared to Imperial escort vessels, allowing them to maintain optimal firing positions while avoiding return fire from Imperial weapons batteries. However, the Imperial vessel's superior armor and structural integrity allowed them to absorb damage that would have crippled Tau ships of equivalent size. Tau pulse weaponry proved effective against Imperial escort armor at close range, with concentrated fire from multiple vessels capable of penetrating Imperial void shields and causing significant hull damage. The electromagnetic principles underlying Tau weapons also created interference patterns that disrupted Imperial sensor systems and communication networks, providing tactical advantages that partially compensated for the Tau fleet's smaller size and lighter construction. The engagement ended when both fleets withdrew after sustaining moderate casualties, but the encounter provided crucial intelligence for both sides. Imperial survivors reported contact with an unknown alien species possessing advanced technology and apparent military capabilities, while Tau commanders gained their first direct experience with Imperial naval tactics and weapon systems. The information gathered during this brief engagement would influence strategic planning for both civilizations as they prepared for future confrontations. The Imperial response to first contact with the Tau reflected standard protocols for dealing with potentially hostile alien species. Naval Command dispatched additional patrol squadrons to the region while requesting guidance from higher authorities regarding appropriate responses to this new threat. The Administratum began compiling intelligence reports on Tau capabilities and territorial claims, while the Imperial Guard prepared contingency plans for potential ground operations against Tau colonies. The Tau response demonstrated their civilization's more systematic approach to strategic planning and intelligence gathering. Watercast analysts began studying captured Imperial communication intercepts and equipment fragments to develop understanding of Imperial language and technology. Earthcast engineers examined weapon damage patterns and debris from the engagement to assess Imperial military capabilities and identify potential vulnerabilities. Firecast strategists developed tactical doctrines for engaging Imperial forces based on observed Imperial ship movements and weapon characteristics. The first significant ground engagement occurred when Imperial forces attempted to establish a monitoring station on a contested world in the outer Damocles Gulf region. The planet, designated by Imperial cartographers as Taros Prime, possessed strategic value due to its location along potential Imperial supply routes into the region. However, Tau colonization fleets had already identified the world as suitable for settlement and had begun preliminary terraforming operations when Imperial advance forces arrived. The Imperial expedition consisted of elements from the Talern Desert Raiders, a regiment selected for the mission due to their experience operating in harsh environmental conditions similar to those found on Taros Prime. The regiment's commanders had received intelligence briefings regarding potential Tau presence in the region, but lacked detailed information about Tau military capabilities or tactical doctrines. Their operational plan called for rapid establishment of a fortified base that could support larger Imperial forces while serving as a monitoring post for Tau activities throughout the system. The Tau response to Imperial ground operations demonstrated the effectiveness of their hunter-cadre organization and the tactical flexibility provided by their advanced technology. Firecast commanders deployed crisis battlesuit teams to conduct reconnaissance of Imperial positions, while conventional infantry established defensive positions around key terraforming installations. The Tau strategy emphasized mobility and precision strikes rather than direct confrontation, seeking to disrupt Imperial operations while avoiding casualties that might escalate the conflict. The first crisis battlesuit engagement with Imperial forces occurred when a reconnaissance team encountered an Imperial patrol conducting perimeter security operations around their forward base. The Imperial soldiers, equipped with standard issue lasguns and flak armor, found themselves facing enemies who could attack from aerial positions while remaining largely immune to return fire. The crisis suit's pulse weapons proved devastatingly effective against Imperial infantry, with individual shots capable of penetrating flak armor and causing massive trauma to targets. The Imperial response to crisis battlesuit attacks demonstrated both the adaptability and limitations of Imperial Guard tactical doctrine. Talern commanders quickly recognized that their standard infantry tactics were inadequate for engaging highly mobile enemies with superior firepower and protection. They began deploying heavy weapons teams equipped with las cannons and missile launchers that could potentially damage crisis suits, while requesting air support and armored reinforcements that could provide the firepower necessary to engage Tau forces effectively. The escalation of ground combat on Taros Prime attracted additional forces from both sides as the strategic importance of the engagement became clear. Imperial reinforcements included armored companies equipped with Leman Russ battle tanks and Chimera armored personnel carriers, while Tau forces received additional hunter cadres and the first deployment of hammerhead gunships in combat against Imperial forces. The resulting battles provided both civilizations with crucial experience in large-scale warfare against technologically sophisticated opponents. Hammerhead gunships proved particularly effective against Imperial armored formations, with their railgun armament capable of penetrating the frontal armor of Leman Russ tanks at extended ranges. The gravitic propulsion systems allowed hammerheads to engage Imperial armor from unexpected angles, while maintaining the mobility necessary to avoid return fire from Imperial heavy weapons. However, Imperial forces adapted their tactics to exploit the hammerheads' relatively light armor, using concentrated fire from multiple vehicles to overwhelm individual targets. The development of Tau stealth technology received significant impetus from the challenges encountered during these early Imperial engagements. Earthcast engineers recognized that conventional Tau forces, despite their technological advantages, remained vulnerable to Imperial numerical superiority and the devastating firepower of Imperial heavy weapons. The solution lay in developing systems that could allow Tau forces to avoid detection while maneuvering into advantageous positions for precision strikes. The first experimental stealth systems emerged from research into the electromagnetic properties of Tau pulse weapons and their interaction with Imperial sensor systems. Earthcast scientists discovered that carefully modulated electromagnetic fields could create interference patterns that disrupted Imperial auger arrays and targeting systems. By incorporating field generators into battlesuit designs, Tau engineers created the first crewed stealth capabilities that could render crisis suits nearly invisible to Imperial sensors at extended ranges. These early stealth systems were energy-intensive and unreliable, often failing at crucial moments or creating distinctive signatures that experienced Imperial operators could learn to detect. However, the basic concept proved sound, and continued development during the Second Sphere period produced increasingly sophisticated systems that could provide consistent concealment against most Imperial detection methods. The integration of stealth technology with existing battlesuit designs created new tactical possibilities that Firecast commanders quickly learned to exploit. Stealth suit development progressed rapidly as Firecast requirements for deep reconnaissance and precision strike capabilities became clear during the expanding conflict with Imperial forces. These specialized battlesuits sacrificed the heavy armor and firepower of crisis suits in exchange for enhanced stealth systems, advanced sensor packages, and extended operational endurance. Stealth suit teams could infiltrate Imperial positions to gather intelligence, conduct sabotage operations, or eliminate high-value targets without revealing their presence. The tactical innovations developed during Second Sphere conflicts reflected the Tau's systematic approach to military problem-solving and their willingness to adapt their doctrines based on battlefield experience. The Koyan philosophy proved particularly effective against Imperial forces, with Tau commanders using superior mobility and stealth capabilities to position their forces for devastating ambushes. Crisis battlesuit teams would establish overwatch positions, while conventional infantry and vehicles maneuvered Imperial forces into predetermined killing zones. Montka tactics evolved to exploit Imperial command structure vulnerabilities and the relative inflexibility of Imperial Guard formations. Tau forces would conduct simultaneous strikes against Imperial command posts, communication centers, and supply depots, creating confusion and coordination failures that could cripple entire Imperial formations. The speed and precision of these attacks often prevented Imperial forces from mounting effective counterattacks before Tau units had withdrawn to new positions. The establishment of new sept worlds during the Second Sphere expansion required careful balance between military necessity and the long-term objectives of Tau civilization. Each new colony needed sufficient defensive capabilities to resist Imperial counterattacks while maintaining the industrial and population growth necessary to support continued expansion. The Ethereals provided strategic guidance that ensured new settlements would contribute to the greater good, rather than simply consuming resources needed for military operations. Tau colonial administration evolved to address the challenges of governing territories under constant threat of Imperial attack. Watercast administrators developed protocols for maintaining civilian morale and productivity while coordinating with Firecast defensive operations. Earthcast engineers prioritized industrial projects that could support military requirements while building the infrastructure necessary for long-term colonial development. Aircast pilots established supply networks that could operate despite Imperial interdiction efforts. The systematic Imperial resistance that emerged during the Second Sphere period reflected the Imperium's growing recognition of the Tau threat and the strategic importance of containing Tau expansion. Imperial commanders began developing specialized tactics for engaging Tau forces, emphasizing the use of overwhelming firepower and numerical superiority to overcome Tau technological advantages. The deployment of Space Marine forces to critical sectors demonstrated the Imperium's commitment to halting Tau expansion through decisive military action. Imperial intelligence gathering efforts intensified as the scope of Tau capabilities became apparent through continued engagements. The Ordo Xenos began compiling detailed assessments of Tau technology and military organization, while Imperial Guard commanders shared tactical lessons learned through combat experience. This systematic approach to understanding Tau capabilities would eventually lead to more effective Imperial countermeasures and strategic responses to Tau expansion efforts. The technological advancement that characterized the Second Sphere period established the foundation for Tau military dominance in the region while demonstrating their ability to adapt quickly to new challenges and threats. However, the expansion into the Damocles Gulf had not gone unnoticed by the galaxy's dominant power. Deep within the administrative centers of the Imperium, reports of alien incursions and lost patrol fleets began accumulating on the desks of sector commanders and administratum officials. What had initially been dismissed as isolated incidents involving minor Xenos raiders gradually coalesced into a pattern that demanded immediate and overwhelming response. The Imperial High Command's assessment of the Tau threat reflected centuries of experience dealing with alien species that dared to challenge humanity's rightful dominance of the galaxy. The initial intelligence reports described a technologically sophisticated species with apparent military capabilities and territorial ambitions that directly conflicted with Imperial expansion plans for the Eastern Fringe. The systematic nature of Tau colonization efforts and their apparent ability to coordinate large-scale military operations suggested a level of organization that placed them in the category of major threats requiring decisive action. Lord Commander Solar Macharius, despite being long dead, had established doctrinal precedents for dealing with such threats that still guided Imperial strategic thinking in the 41st millennium. The Damocles Gulf region represented valuable territory that could serve as a launching point for future Imperial expansion into the Eastern Fringe, while the Tau presence threatened existing Imperial supply routes and communication networks throughout the sector. The decision to launch a full-scale crusade reflected both the strategic importance of the region and the Imperium's unwillingness to tolerate alien expansion within what they considered rightfully human space. The Damocles Gulf Crusade launched with forces assembled from across multiple sectors, representing one of the largest Imperial military operations in the Eastern Fringe during that period. The Crusade force included elements from 17 different Imperial Guard regiments, each selected for specific capabilities that would contribute to the overall campaign objectives. The Cadian 47th Armored Regiment brought their expertise in mechanized warfare and urban combat, while the Talern 12th Desert Raiders provided experience in the harsh environmental conditions expected in many target systems. The Vestroyan 15th Firstborn contributed their disciplined firepower and defensive capabilities, essential for establishing and maintaining forward bases in contested territory. The Catachan 3rd Green Devils brought their jungle warfare expertise and unconventional tactics, valuable for operations in the diverse planetary environments throughout the Damocles Gulf. Each regiment had been reinforced with additional heavy weapons companies, armored support, and specialized equipment designed for extended operations far from established Imperial supply bases. The Space Marine contingent assigned to the Damocles Crusade represented an unprecedented commitment of Astartes' resources to a single campaign against a previously unknown alien species. The Ultramarines committed 2 full companies under the command of Captain Uriel Ventress, bringing their tactical flexibility and combined arms expertise to the operation. The Imperial Fists deployed a reinforced company specializing in siege warfare and fortification assault, capabilities that Imperial planners expected to prove crucial against Tau defensive positions. The White Scars contributed a fast attack company equipped with bikes and land speeders, providing the mobility and reconnaissance capabilities necessary for operations across the Gulf's vast distances. The Raven Guard deployed specialized infiltration units capable of conducting deep reconnaissance and sabotage operations behind Tau lines. The Iron Hands brought their technological expertise and heavy weapons specializations, while the Salamanders provided close support capabilities and expertise in fighting in extreme environmental conditions. The Imperial Navy component of the Damocles Crusade included elements from 3 different battle fleets, with the flagship Emperor's Wrath serving as the command vessel for the overall operation. The fleet included 6 battleships, 12 cruisers, and over 40 escort vessels, providing the firepower and transport capacity necessary for sustained operations throughout the target region. Specialized vessels included several forged ships equipped with advanced manufacturing capabilities for field repairs and equipment production, along with survey vessels designed for rapid reconnaissance of contested systems. The first major engagement of the Damocles Crusade occurred when Imperial advance forces encountered Tau defensive positions established around the strategically important world of Daleth. The planet served as a major administrative and commercial center for Tau operations throughout the Damocles Gulf, with extensive orbital facilities and surface installations that supported Tau expansion efforts across multiple systems. The Imperial assault plan called for simultaneous orbital bombardment and ground assault operations designed to overwhelm Tau defenses through superior firepower and numerical advantage. The Battle of Daleth began with a massive Imperial Navy bombardment that targeted known Tau military installations and orbital defense platforms. The Imperial fleet moved into bombardment positions, expecting minimal resistance from Tau naval forces, based on intelligence assessments that suggested Tau spacecraft were primarily designed for exploration and transport rather than fleet combat operations. However, the Tau response demonstrated capabilities that Imperial planners had not anticipated, with Tau orbital defense networks proving far more sophisticated and effective than expected. Tau orbital defense platforms incorporated advanced gravitic technology that allowed them to maneuver during combat, making them difficult targets for Imperial naval gunners accustomed to engaging fixed installations. The platforms mounted heavy pulse cannons and experimental rail weapons that could penetrate Imperial void shields at extended ranges, while their gravitic drives provided the mobility necessary to avoid return fire from Imperial lance batteries and macro cannons. The Tau naval response to the Imperial bombardment included the deployment of Corvatra fleet elements that had been stationed throughout the Daleth system as part of the planet's defensive preparations. Tau spacecraft demonstrated tactical coordination and weapons effectiveness that surprised Imperial commanders who had expected to face a technologically inferior opponent. Tau vessels used their superior maneuverability to conduct hit-and-run attacks against Imperial escort squadrons while avoiding direct engagement with Imperial capital ships. The ground assault on Daleth began with simultaneous drops by Imperial Guard airborne units and Space Marine assault companies, targeting key installations and transportation networks that supported Tau defensive operations. The Imperial forces expected to face conventional alien defenders using primitive weapons and tactics, but instead encountered fire-cast hunter cadres equipped with advanced battlesuits and gravitic vehicles that could engage Imperial forces from unexpected directions and ranges. Crisis battlesuit teams proved particularly effective against Imperial drop operations, using their mobility and firepower to attack Imperial forces during their most vulnerable phase immediately after landing. The suit's pulse weapons could penetrate Imperial flak armor and carapace protection with devastating effectiveness, while their gravitic drives allowed them to engage Imperial forces from aerial positions that conventional weapons could not reach. Imperial casualties during the initial landing operations exceeded projected levels by significant margins, forcing commanders to revise their tactical assessments and deployment strategies. The Imperial response to crisis battlesuit attacks demonstrated the adaptability that had made the Imperial Guard effective against diverse enemies throughout the galaxy. Heavy weapons teams equipped with las cannons and missile launchers were deployed in overwatch positions to provide anti-aircraft coverage, while Imperial armor formations used concentrated fire to overwhelm individual crisis suits when they could be brought to battle. However, the Tau's superior mobility and tactical coordination made such engagements rare and usually favorable to the Tau forces. Commander Pure Tide emerged as the primary Tau strategic leader during the Daleth campaign, demonstrating tactical innovations that would influence Tau military doctrine for generations. His background as a veteran of numerous Second Sphere expansion conflicts provided him with extensive experience in fighting Imperial forces, while his systematic approach to military planning reflected the best traditions of fire-cast strategic thinking. Pure Tide's defensive strategy for Daleth emphasized the use of mobile reserves and coordinated counterattacks rather than static defensive positions that could be overwhelmed by Imperial firepower. Pure Tide's tactical innovations during the Daleth campaign included the development of layered defensive systems that used terrain features and prepared positions to channel Imperial attacks into predetermined killing zones. Crisis battlesuit teams were positioned to provide mutual support while maintaining the mobility necessary to relocate when Imperial forces adapted to their positions. Conventional fire-cast infantry established strong defensive positions that could absorb Imperial attacks while crisis teams maneuvered to strike Imperial flanks and rear areas. The coordination between different Tau military units during the Daleth campaign demonstrated the effectiveness of their unified command structure and advanced communication systems. Stealth suit reconnaissance teams provided real-time intelligence on Imperial movements and positions, allowing Pure Tide to anticipate Imperial tactical decisions and position his forces accordingly. Hammerhead gunships provided mobile fire support that could engage Imperial armor formations while remaining beyond the range of most Imperial weapon systems. The Battle of Daleth extended over several months as Imperial forces struggled to overcome Tau defensive positions, while Tau forces conducted increasingly sophisticated counterattack operations. Imperial commanders found their traditional tactics of overwhelming firepower and frontal assault ineffective against enemies who could avoid direct confrontation while striking at Imperial vulnerabilities. The urban environment of Daleth's major cities provided additional challenges, with Tau forces using their knowledge of local terrain to conduct ambush operations and precision strikes against Imperial supply lines. Imperial Space Marine forces proved more effective against Tau defenders than conventional Imperial Guard units, with their superior equipment and training allowing them to engage crisis battlesuits on more equal terms. Astartes tactical squads equipped with heavy weapons could provide the firepower necessary to threaten crisis suits, while their power armor offered protection against Tau pulse weapons that was superior to standard Imperial Guard equipment. However, even Space Marine forces found themselves challenged by Tau tactical flexibility and the aliens' ability to coordinate complex multi-unit operations. The siege of Daleth's primary, Hive City, became the focal point of Imperial assault operations, as commanders recognized that capturing the planet's administrative center would cripple Tau defensive coordination throughout the system. The city's defensive preparations included extensive underground tunnel networks that allowed Tau forces to move between positions without exposure to Imperial orbital bombardment, while surface installations incorporated advanced pulse weapon systems that could engage Imperial aircraft and dropships. Imperial siege operations against the Hive City demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of traditional Imperial tactical doctrine when confronted with technologically sophisticated opponents. Imperial artillery and orbital bombardment proved effective against fixed Tau positions, but could not prevent Tau mobile forces from conducting counterattacks against Imperial siege lines. The urban environment negated many of the advantages provided by Imperial armor and heavy weapons, while favoring Tau mobility and precision weapons. Pure Tide's defensive strategy during the Hive City siege emphasized the use of coordinated withdrawal operations that would draw Imperial forces into prepared ambush positions, while preserving Tau military strength for future operations. Rather than attempting to hold every position against overwhelming Imperial firepower, Tau forces would conduct fighting withdrawals that inflicted maximum casualties on Imperial attackers while maintaining their own combat effectiveness. This approach reflected Pure Tide's understanding that the Tau could not match Imperial numerical superiority in prolonged static engagements. The tactical lessons learned during the Daleth campaign influenced Tau military development for decades afterward, with many of Pure Tide's innovations becoming standard elements of Firecast doctrine. His emphasis on mobility and coordination became fundamental principles of Tau tactical thinking, while his methods for integrating different types of military units into cohesive fighting forces established organizational patterns that would be adopted throughout Tau space. The campaign also demonstrated the importance of advanced technology in providing tactical advantages that could compensate for numerical inferiority against Imperial forces. Two of Pure Tide's most promising students during this period were Shassel Emyen and Shassel Ors Shi, young Firecast officers who would later become known throughout the galaxy as Commander Farsight and Commander Shadowsun. Both demonstrated exceptional tactical abilities during the Daleth campaign, with Emyen showing particular aptitude for aggressive Montka operations, while Orshi excelled at the patient Koyan approach. Their different tactical preferences reflected the two primary schools of Tau military thought, while demonstrating the flexibility that made Tau forces effective against diverse opponents. The prolonged nature of the Daleth campaign began to strain Imperial resources and logistics, as the Damocles Crusade extended far longer than original planning had anticipated. Imperial supply lines stretched across multiple systems became vulnerable to Tau raiding operations, while the high casualty rates among Imperial forces required constant reinforcement from reserves that were needed for operations throughout the Eastern Fringe. The campaign's duration also allowed Tau forces to adapt their tactics and equipment based on combat experience, making them increasingly effective against Imperial assault operations. The unexpected termination of the Damocles Gulf Crusade came not from military defeat or strategic reassessment, but from the emergence of a threat that dwarfed even the Tau expansion in its implications for Imperial survival. Hive Fleet Behemoth, the first major Tyranid incursion into Imperial space, appeared on the Eastern Fringe with devastating force that demanded immediate redeployment of Imperial military resources. The alien swarm's approach toward the Ultramar sector required every available Imperial ship and regiment, forcing the abandonment of operations against the Tau in favor of defending humanity's core territories. The withdrawal of Imperial forces from the Damocles Gulf provided the Tau with more than just territorial breathing space. It offered crucial opportunities to explore the diverse alien species that inhabited the contested regions they now controlled. Among the various Xenos encountered during the Second Sphere expansion, none would prove more significant to Tau military doctrine than the Kroot of Petch, a species whose first contact with Tau forces would fundamentally alter the nature of the greater goods expansion philosophy. The discovery of Petch occurred during routine exploration operations conducted by water-caste survey teams investigating systems abandoned by retreating Imperial forces. The world appeared unremarkable from orbital reconnaissance, a jungle-covered planet with extensive forest canopies and primitive electromagnetic signatures suggesting pre-industrial civilization. However, closer examination revealed evidence of sophisticated tool use and organized settlements that indicated a species with significant potential for development under Tau guidance. Initial contact protocols developed by water-caste diplomats emphasized peaceful communication and the demonstration of Tau technological superiority through beneficial applications rather than military displays. The survey team that first encountered Kroot hunting parties carried advanced medical equipment, communication devices, and small technological gifts designed to establish friendly relations with primitive species. Their approach reflected lessons learned during previous first contact situations, where aggressive displays had often resulted in unnecessary conflicts that complicated subsequent diplomatic efforts. The Kroot who encountered these first Tau explorers possessed physical characteristics that immediately distinguished them from any previously known species. Standing taller than most Tau, they exhibited avian features including prominent beaks, keen eyes adapted for hunting, and muscular frames that suggested both strength and agility. Their primitive weapons included crude firearms and bladed implements, but their tactical coordination and hunting techniques demonstrated intelligence levels that impressed the observing Tau diplomats. The most remarkable discovery about Kroot physiology emerged through extended observation of their feeding habits and social behaviors. Water-caste xenobiologists documented the Kroot practice of consuming the flesh of defeated enemies, initially interpreting this as simple cannibalistic behavior common among primitive species. However, detailed study revealed that Kroot possessed unique evolutionary mechanisms that allowed them to absorb and incorporate beneficial genetic traits from consumed organisms, fundamentally altering their own physical characteristics over successive generations. This evolutionary adaptability represented capabilities that surpassed even the most advanced Earth-caste genetic manipulation techniques. Kroot who consumed the flesh of swift prey animals would develop enhanced speed and agility, while those who fed on armored creatures would grow thicker skin and stronger bone structures. The process operated at both individual and generational levels, with changes accumulating over time to produce Kroot populations specifically adapted to their local environments and dietary choices. The strategic implications of Kroot evolutionary capabilities were immediately apparent to Tau military planners. A species that could adapt its physical characteristics based on combat experience and dietary choices offered unprecedented opportunities for developing specialized military units tailored to specific battlefield requirements. Firecast strategists envisioned Kroot forces that could be gradually modified to excel in particular combat environments or against specific types of enemies through carefully controlled feeding programs. The negotiation of the initial mercenary agreement between the Tau Empire and the Kroot required careful balance between Tau's strategic objectives and Kroot cultural traditions. The Kroot operated under tribal leadership structures centered around powerful individuals known as shapers, who guided their tribe's evolutionary development through control over feeding practices and combat assignments. These leaders possessed both the authority to commit their warriors to extended campaigns and the expertise necessary to direct their tribe's adaptive development toward desired outcomes. Kroot society valued martial prowess and evolutionary advancement above material wealth or territorial control, making them natural allies for a species that could offer both combat opportunities and access to diverse genetic material through warfare against varied enemies. The Tau negotiators, led by experienced water caste diplomats, presented their proposal as a mutually beneficial arrangement that would provide the Kroot with unprecedented opportunities for evolutionary development, while giving the Tau access to specialized military capabilities unavailable through their own forces. The terms of the mercenary agreement established frameworks for Kroot participation in Tau military operations while preserving their tribal autonomy and cultural practices. Kroot Shapers retained authority over their warriors' feeding practices and evolutionary development, while Tau commanders gained access to specialized troops whose capabilities could be gradually adapted to meet specific operational requirements. The agreement also included provisions for technological exchange, with Tau equipment and weapons being provided to Kroot forces in return for their military service. The integration of Kroot evolutionary adaptability with Tau technology produced innovations that neither species could have achieved independently. Earth caste engineers worked closely with Kroot Shapers to develop weapons and equipment that could enhance natural Kroot abilities while providing the technological advantages necessary for modern warfare. The most successful of these collaborations resulted in the development of Kroot rifles, weapons that combined Tau pulse technology with designs optimized for Kroot physiology and combat preferences. Kroot rifles incorporated simplified versions of Tau electromagnetic acceleration systems that could propel solid projectiles with devastating effect while remaining reliable under the harsh conditions that Kroot forces typically encountered. The weapons were designed to be easily maintained using primitive tools and techniques, allowing Kroot warriors to keep them functional during extended operations far from Tau support facilities. The rifles also included bayonet attachments that could serve as close combat weapons, accommodating the Kroot preference for melee engagement when ranged combat proved insufficient. The development of specialized Kroot units within Tau military organization required careful consideration of both tactical requirements and Kroot cultural limitations. Kroot warriors excelled in reconnaissance, infiltration, and close combat operations, where their natural hunting instincts and physical capabilities provided significant advantages. However, their tribal social structures and preference for independent action made them less suitable for the coordinated maneuver warfare that characterized standard Tau tactical doctrine. Kroot carnivore squads emerged as the primary Kroot military unit within Tau forces, consisting of experienced warriors led by Shapers who could direct both their combat actions and their evolutionary development. These units specialized in reconnaissance operations that took advantage of Kroot tracking abilities and environmental adaptation, while their combat capabilities made them effective assault troops for operations requiring close-quarters fighting. The squad's flexibility allowed them to operate independently for extended periods while maintaining coordination with larger Tau military operations. Krootox riders represented a more specialized application of Kroot evolutionary capabilities, utilizing domesticated Krootox beasts that had been selectively bred and adapted for military service. These massive creatures served as living artillery platforms, carrying heavy weapons that could provide fire support for Kroot infantry, while their natural armor and strength made them effective assault vehicles. The symbiotic relationship between Kroot riders and their mounts reflected the species' broader approach to evolutionary development through controlled interaction with other organisms. The success of Kroot integration encouraged Tau expansion of their auxiliary recruitment programs to include other alien species encountered during Second Sphere operations. The philosophical framework of the greater good provided justification for incorporating diverse species into Tau military and civilian structures, arguing that each species possessed unique capabilities that could contribute to the collective advancement of all participants. This approach represented a fundamental departure from the xenophobic policies of the Imperium and most other galactic powers. The Vespid stingwings of the Vespid homeworld presented entirely different challenges and opportunities for Tau integration efforts. These insectoid aliens possessed natural flight capabilities and specialized sensory organs that made them exceptionally effective in aerial reconnaissance and combat operations. However, their alien psychology and communication methods required the development of specialized interface technology before meaningful cooperation became possible. Earth-caste engineers developed Vespid strain leaders, specialized communication devices that could translate Tau tactical instructions into the complex pheromone and sonic patterns that Vespid used for communication. These devices also incorporated neural interface technology that could influence Vespid behavior patterns, ensuring that Vespid units would follow Tau tactical directives even when operating independently. The strain leaders represented sophisticated examples of Tau biotechnology and demonstrated their growing expertise in managing relationships with diverse alien species. Vespid military units specialized in aerial assault operations that took advantage of their natural flight capabilities and their neutron blasters, weapons that could disrupt enemy electronics and armor systems through focused particle emission. Their ability to operate in three-dimensional combat environments made them valuable for attacking enemy positions that were inaccessible to ground forces, while their speed and maneuverability allowed them to avoid most defensive countermeasures. However, their limited tactical flexibility and dependence on strain leader technology made them most effective when operating under direct Tau supervision. The integration of the Nikasar presented different challenges due to their psychic abilities and their advanced but pacifistic civilization. These bear-like aliens possessed natural psychic talents that could enhance Tau communication and navigation capabilities, but their philosophical opposition to violence made them unsuitable for direct military applications. Instead, the Tau incorporated Nikasar into their aircast operations, where their psychic abilities could assist with spacecraft navigation and long-range communication without requiring direct participation in combat operations. Nikasar DAOs became integral components of Tau exploration and colonization fleets, serving as scout vessels and communication relays that could operate independently for extended periods. Their psychic crews could navigate through dangerous space phenomena and maintain contact across interstellar distances without relying on conventional communication systems. The vessel's advanced but non-threatening design also made them ideal for first contact operations with other alien species, as their obviously non-military configuration could help establish peaceful communication before introducing more obviously martial Tau forces. The expansion of auxiliary programs beyond military applications reflected the Tau's comprehensive approach to integrating alien species into their civilization. Water caste administrators developed protocols for managing diverse alien populations within Tau colonies, ensuring that each species could contribute their unique capabilities while maintaining social stability and adherence to greater good principles. These programs required sophisticated understanding of alien psychology and social structures, driving advances in Tau xenobiology and cultural analysis. The establishment of the Gevasa program represented the most ambitious attempt at alien integration, targeting human populations within territories claimed by Tau expansion operations. Unlike other auxiliary species, humans possessed technological capabilities and military experience that made them potentially valuable allies, while their familiarity with Imperial tactics and equipment provided crucial intelligence advantages. However, their cultural background and previous loyalty to the Imperium created integration challenges that required careful handling to avoid rebellion or sabotage. The conversion of Imperial worlds to Tau rule required sophisticated propaganda campaigns that demonstrated the superior living conditions available under Tau administration, while undermining loyalty to the distant and oppressive imperial government. Water caste specialists studied captured imperial populations to identify the social pressures and economic hardships that could be exploited to encourage defection. Their approach emphasized practical benefits rather than ideological conversion, showing potential converts that the greater good offered tangible improvements to their daily lives. The first successful Gevesa conversions occurred on frontier worlds where imperial administration had been particularly harsh or ineffective, leaving populations receptive to alternative governance structures. Tau administrators provided improved medical care, better food distribution, and more efficient infrastructure maintenance, demonstrating their commitment to improving human welfare rather than simply exploiting conquered populations. These practical demonstrations proved more effective than abstract philosophical arguments in convincing humans to accept Tau rule. Gevesa military units required extensive retraining to integrate them into Tau tactical doctrine, while taking advantage of their existing military experience and knowledge of Imperial capabilities. Former Imperial Guard soldiers brought valuable expertise in conventional warfare and familiarity with Imperial equipment, but they needed to learn Tau coordination techniques and adapt to the more flexible tactical approaches that characterized Tau military operations. The training process also served as continued indoctrination, reinforcing loyalty to the greater good through shared military service and demonstrated Tau competence. The integration of human populations into Tau society created opportunities for technological and cultural exchange that benefited both species. Human knowledge of Imperial technology and manufacturing techniques could be combined with Tau innovations to create hybrid systems that exceeded the capabilities of either species alone. Similarly, human cultural practices and social structures could be studied and potentially adapted to improve Tau civilian administration and population management techniques. The philosophical implications of auxiliary integration challenged traditional Tau understanding of the greater good and their role in galactic civilization. The original concept had focused on the unity and advancement of Tau society, but the incorporation of diverse alien species expanded this vision to encompass a multi-species empire united by shared principles rather than common biology. This evolution reflected the Tau's growing understanding of their place in the galaxy and their potential to serve as a unifying force among the diverse species that inhabited the eastern fringe. The practical management of multi-species military forces required the development of new command structures and communication systems that could coordinate diverse capabilities while maintaining tactical effectiveness. Tau commanders needed to understand the strengths and limitations of each auxiliary species while developing tactical doctrines that could integrate their various capabilities into cohesive battle plans. This complexity demanded higher levels of training and expertise from Tau officers, while creating opportunities for tactical innovations that would not have been possible with purely Tau forces. The logistical challenges of supporting diverse auxiliary forces drove advances in Tau manufacturing and supply systems that had broader applications throughout their expanding empire. Different species required specialized equipment, dietary supplements, and environmental controls that complicated standard Tau logistics procedures. Earth cast engineers developed modular supply systems that could be adapted to meet the needs of various auxiliary units while maintaining the efficiency necessary for extended military operations. The successful integration of auxiliary forces during the Second Sphere period had transformed the Tau Empire from a purely Tau civilization into a multi-species confederation united under the greater good. This transformation provided both the military capabilities and philosophical justification for the most ambitious expansion effort in Tau history. By the early years of the 42nd millennium, the Tau possessed industrial capacity, population reserves, and technological sophistication that far exceeded what their original homeworld could have supported alone. The time had come to push beyond the established boundaries of their territory and claim their rightful place among the galaxy's dominant powers. The Third Sphere expansion launched under circumstances dramatically different from previous expansion efforts. Where earlier expansions had targeted relatively empty regions with minimal resistance from established powers, the Third Sphere would push directly into heavily contested Imperial space where every system contained established human populations and military installations. This aggressive expansion strategy reflected both Tau confidence in their military capabilities and the Ethereals' growing conviction that the greater good demanded active liberation of oppressed populations throughout the galaxy. Commander Shadowsun emerged as the primary military leader for the Third Sphere operations, her appointment representing both continuity with Pure Tide's tactical innovations and adaptation to the unique challenges of large-scale warfare against entrenched Imperial positions. Her background as one of Pure Tide's most accomplished students provided her with comprehensive understanding of Imperial tactical doctrine and the proven methods for exploiting Imperial weaknesses. However, her own combat experience during the intervening decades had also exposed her to the evolving nature of Imperial military capabilities and the need for continued tactical innovation. Shadowsun's command style emphasized the integration of traditional Tau tactical principles with the diverse capabilities provided by auxiliary forces and advanced technology developed since the Damocles Gulf Crusade. Her planning process incorporated detailed intelligence analysis that took advantage of Gevesa knowledge of Imperial administrative and military structures, while her tactical implementation utilized the specialized capabilities of Kroot reconnaissance units and Vespid aerial assault forces. This comprehensive approach reflected the maturation of Tau military doctrine from the relatively simple combined arms tactics of earlier periods to sophisticated multi-species operations. The selection of target systems for the Third Sphere expansion reflected careful strategic analysis that balanced military feasibility against the broader objectives of demonstrating Tau capabilities to potential allies and enemies throughout the Eastern Fringe. Priority targets included Imperial worlds with significant human populations that could potentially be converted to the greater good, systems with strategic resources necessary for continued Tau expansion, and positions that could serve as forward bases for future operations deeper into Imperial space. The Agrellan campaign represented the most significant early operation of the Third Sphere expansion, targeting an Imperial fortress world that controlled access to multiple strategic systems throughout the region. Agrellan's defensive preparations included extensive orbital installations, surface fortifications, and garrison forces drawn from multiple Imperial Guard regiments with extensive experience in defensive warfare. The planet's strategic importance had made it a priority for Imperial military investment, resulting in defensive capabilities that exceeded those encountered during previous Tau expansion operations. The initial assault on Agrellan demonstrated the technological advances that had occurred within Tau forces since the Damocles Gulf Crusade. The attacking fleet included new classes of Tau warships equipped with advanced gravitic drives and heavy pulse weapon systems that could engage Imperial naval forces on equal terms. These vessels incorporated lessons learned from previous naval engagements, with improved armor protection and enhanced electronic warfare capabilities that could disrupt Imperial communication and targeting systems. The ground assault phase of the Agrellan campaign showcased the tactical innovations that Shadowsun had developed for large-scale operations against fortified Imperial positions. Rather than attempting direct frontal assaults against prepared defenses, Tau forces conducted simultaneous multi-vector attacks that exploited the mobility advantages provided by their gravitic vehicles and battlesuit forces. Crisis battlesuit teams equipped with advanced stealth systems infiltrated Imperial defensive perimeters to conduct precision strikes against command centers and heavy weapons positions, while conventional fire cast infantry established supporting positions that could provide covering fire for subsequent assault phases. The deployment of new Ghost-Kill battlesuit prototypes during the Agrellan operations marked a significant advancement in Tau stealth technology and special operations capabilities. These experimental suits incorporated advanced stealth field generators that could render them nearly invisible to most Imperial detection systems, while providing the firepower and protection necessary for extended independent operations behind enemy lines. The Ghostkill's design philosophy emphasized reconnaissance and precision strikes rather than direct combat, allowing small teams to gather intelligence and eliminate high-value targets without revealing their presence to enemy forces. The stealth field technology integrated into Ghostkill suits represented the culmination of decades of research into electromagnetic manipulation and sensor disruption techniques. Earth-cast engineers had developed sophisticated field generators that could bend electromagnetic radiation around the suit, creating zones of distorted space that confused Imperial auger arrays and targeting systems. The technology required substantial power generation capabilities and created distinctive heat signatures that experienced Imperial operators could potentially detect, but under most combat conditions, the Ghostkill provided unprecedented stealth capabilities for Tau forces. The Ghostkill's weapon systems reflected the specialized requirements of stealth operations, emphasizing accuracy and minimal detection signatures over raw firepower. The suit mounted fusion blasters that could eliminate enemy vehicles and fortifications with single shots while producing minimal electromagnetic emissions that might reveal the suit's position. Secondary weapons included burst cannons optimized for engaging infantry targets and drone controllers that could coordinate supporting drone units from concealed positions. The integration of advanced drone technology throughout Tau forces during the Third Sphere period represented another significant technological advancement that enhanced their tactical flexibility and operational capabilities. The development of artificial intelligence systems sophisticated enough to operate independently while maintaining coordination with organic forces had required breakthrough advances in computational technology and behavioral programming. These AI-controlled drones could perform reconnaissance, provide fire support, and conduct specialized missions without requiring direct supervision from organic operators. Tactical drones equipped with advanced sensor packages became standard equipment for most Tau military units, providing real-time intelligence gathering and target designation capabilities that enhanced the effectiveness of Tau weapon systems. These drones could operate in environments too dangerous for organic troops while maintaining communication links that allowed their intelligence to be immediately integrated into tactical planning processes. Their small size and advanced stealth capabilities made them nearly impossible for Imperial forces to detect or intercept under most conditions. Gun drones armed with pulse carbines provided mobile fire support that could supplement the capabilities of organic infantry units while operating in coordination with battlesuit forces. These drones could maintain accurate fire while maneuvering through complex terrain or aerial environments that would challenge organic troops, while their expendable nature allowed commanders to accept losses that would be unacceptable with organic forces. The drones' artificial intelligence systems could adapt their tactics based on battlefield conditions while maintaining coordination with larger tactical plans. Shield drones equipped with advanced defensive systems could provide protection for high-value targets or critical positions through the generation of energy barriers that could absorb or deflect incoming fire. These drones incorporated miniaturized versions of the shield technology used on larger Tau vehicles and installations, providing portable defensive capabilities that could be deployed wherever they were most needed. Their mobility allowed them to reposition quickly to meet changing tactical requirements, while their automated systems could respond to threats faster than organic operators. The improvements to stealth field generators during the Third Sphere period extended beyond individual battlesuit applications to encompass larger military units and installations. Earth-cast engineers developed scaled-up versions of stealth technology that could conceal entire vehicles or small buildings from Imperial detection systems, allowing Tau forces to establish hidden bases and supply depots within Imperial territory. These larger stealth systems required substantial power generation capabilities and were vulnerable to certain types of Imperial sensors, but they provided strategic advantages that justified their resource requirements. The deployment of improved stealth technology throughout Tau forces fundamentally altered their tactical capabilities and strategic options during the Third Sphere expansion. Stealth-equipped units could conduct deep reconnaissance missions that provided detailed intelligence on Imperial positions and movements, while stealth-protected supply lines could maintain logistics support for extended operations in hostile territory. The psychological impact of fighting enemies who could appear and disappear at will also created significant morale problems for Imperial defenders who found themselves constantly vulnerable to surprise attacks. The establishment of key strategic positions during the Third Sphere expansion required careful balance between military necessity and the long-term objectives of Tau civilization. Each captured system needed sufficient defensive capabilities to resist Imperial counterattacks while providing the industrial and population base necessary to support continued expansion operations. The Tau approach emphasized the rapid establishment of manufacturing facilities and civilian infrastructure that could transform conquered territories into productive components of their expanding empire. The conversion of captured Imperial worlds to Tau administration followed protocols developed during earlier expansion efforts, but adapted to the larger scale and greater complexity of Third Sphere operations. Watercast administrators worked closely with Gevessa advisors who understood Imperial administrative systems and could identify the most effective methods for transitioning human populations to Tau rule. The process emphasized practical improvements to daily life rather than ideological conversion, demonstrating the tangible benefits of greater good governance through improved medical care, more efficient resource distribution, and reduced bureaucratic oppression. The integration of captured Imperial industrial facilities into Tau manufacturing networks required extensive modifications to accommodate Tau technology and production methods. Earthcast engineers studied Imperial manufacturing techniques and equipment to identify components that could be adapted for Tau use while replacing systems that were incompatible with Tau technological standards. The process often resulted in hybrid manufacturing systems that combined Imperial industrial capacity with Tau technological sophistication, creating production capabilities that exceeded what either species could achieve independently. The establishment of forward military bases throughout captured territory provided the defensive infrastructure necessary to protect Tau territorial gains while supporting continued expansion operations. These bases incorporated lessons learned from previous conflicts with Imperial forces, emphasizing mobility and flexibility over static defensive positions that could be overwhelmed by Imperial firepower. The bases included advanced communication systems that could coordinate defensive operations across multiple systems while providing early warning of Imperial counterattack preparations. The Imperial response to Third Sphere expansion operations reflected the Imperium's growing recognition of the Tau threat and their commitment to containing alien expansion through whatever means necessary. Imperial High Command authorized the deployment of additional Space Marine chapters and Imperial Guard regiments to the Eastern Fringe, while the Imperial Navy committed substantial fleet resources to interdicting Tau supply lines and supporting ground operations against Tau positions. The Imperial counteroffensive operations that developed in response to Tau expansion demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of Imperial military doctrine when confronted with technologically sophisticated opponents using unconventional tactics. Imperial forces possessed overwhelming numerical superiority and devastating firepower that could overwhelm Tau positions when properly concentrated, but their logistical requirements and command structure inflexibility often prevented them from effectively responding to Tau mobility and tactical adaptability. Space Marine chapters deployed against Tau forces during the Third Sphere period included the Ultramarines, Imperial Fists, and White Scars, each bringing specialized capabilities and extensive combat experience to the campaign. The Ultramarines provided tactical flexibility and combined arms expertise that made them effective against diverse Tau forces, while the Imperial Fists brought siege warfare capabilities that proved valuable in reducing Tau fortified positions. The White Scars contributed mobility and reconnaissance capabilities that could match Tau forces in rapid maneuver warfare. The involvement of various Imperial Guard regiments in Third Sphere operations provided the numerical strength necessary for large-scale operations, while demonstrating the diversity of Imperial military capabilities. Cadian regiments brought disciplined firepower and defensive expertise that proved effective in static engagements, while Catachan forces provided unconventional warfare capabilities that could operate effectively in the diverse planetary environments throughout the contested region. Tallarn Desert Raiders contributed mechanized warfare expertise and experience operating in harsh environmental conditions. The technological innovations that emerged during the Third Sphere period established new standards for Tau military capabilities, but the expansion's greatest impact would come not from technological advancement alone, but from the emergence of a leader whose tactical brilliance would reshape Tau military doctrine while ultimately challenging the fundamental assumptions of the greater good itself. Shassel Emyen, known throughout the Fire caste as Commander Farsight, had distinguished himself during the Damocles Gulf Crusade as one of Pure Tide's most gifted students, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of Montka tactics that allowed him to achieve decisive victories against numerically superior Imperial forces. Farsight's assignment to lead operations on the Eastern Fringe represented the Ethereal Council's confidence in his abilities and their recognition that the challenges of expanding into increasingly hostile territory required commanders capable of independent action and tactical innovation. The regions beyond established Tau space contain not only Imperial resistance, but also threats that Imperial forces themselves struggled to contain, including Orc warbands, Chaos incursions, and other Xenos species that had carved out their own territories through centuries of warfare. The first major campaign under Farsight's independent command targeted the Arkanasha system, where Tau reconnaissance had identified substantial Orc populations that posed threats to planned expansion routes, while potentially offering opportunities for Tau forces to demonstrate their superiority against enemies that even Imperial forces found challenging. The Orcs of Arkanasha had established a substantial stronghold on the system's primary world, with crude but effective fortifications and a growing population of warriors eager for combat against any opponents foolish enough to challenge them. Farsight's approach to the Arkanasha campaign demonstrated the tactical principles that would define his military philosophy throughout his career. Rather than attempting to overwhelm Orc positions through direct assault, his forces conducted precision strikes against key Orc installations, while avoiding the large-scale engagements that Orcs preferred. Crisis battlesuit teams equipped with advanced stealth systems infiltrated Orc positions to eliminate their crude command structures, while crude auxiliaries used their superior mobility to conduct hit-and-run attacks that disrupted Orc logistics and communications. The campaign's success established Farsight's reputation as a commander capable of achieving strategic objectives with minimal casualties while operating far from Tau support bases. His tactical innovations included the development of combined arms techniques that integrated battlesuit forces with auxiliary units in ways that maximized their respective capabilities while compensating for their individual limitations. Crute reconnaissance teams provided intelligence that allowed crisis suits to position themselves for devastating ambush attacks, while Vespid aerial units could exploit the confusion created by ground operations to strike at targets that would otherwise be inaccessible. The establishment of forward operating bases throughout the contested regions required Farsight's forces to develop new approaches to defensive warfare that could protect Tau installations against diverse threats, while maintaining the mobility necessary for continued offensive operations. These bases incorporated modular construction techniques that allowed rapid deployment and reconfiguration based on changing tactical requirements, while their defensive systems emphasized early warning and rapid response rather than static fortifications that could be overwhelmed by determined attackers. The The discovery of ancient ruins on several worlds throughout the Eastern Fringe provided Farsight with his first exposure to evidence of civilizations that predated both the Tau and the Imperium, raising questions about the galaxy's history that had never been addressed in Tau educational systems. These archaeological sites contained artifacts and inscriptions that suggested the existence of advanced species that had achieved technological capabilities exceeding even current Tau standards before disappearing for unknown reasons. The implications of these discoveries would profoundly influence Farsight's understanding of the Tau's place in galactic history and their assumptions about the inevitability of progress under the greater good. The most significant of these archaeological discoveries occurred on the world of Arthas Malak, where Tau exploration teams uncovered extensive underground complexes containing technology and artwork that defied conventional understanding of galactic civilization's development. The ruins showed evidence of advanced energy manipulation techniques, gravitational control systems, and materials science that exceeded current Tau capabilities, despite apparently being constructed millennia before Tau civilization had achieved spaceflight. The artifacts' alien design aesthetics and incomprehensible inscriptions suggested they had been created by a species entirely unlike any currently known to Tau science. Among the artifacts recovered from Arthas Malak was a weapon that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of Farsight's career and ultimately his relationship with the Tau Empire itself. The Dawn Blade appeared to be a sword constructed from materials that exhibited properties unlike anything in Tau's scientific databases, with an edge that could cut through virtually any known substance while remaining impossibly sharp despite extensive use. The weapon's design incorporated energy field generators that created a distinctive crimson glow along its blade, while its construction suggested manufacturing techniques that exceeded even the most advanced Earth-cast capabilities. The Dawn Blade's most remarkable property became apparent only through extended use in combat situations. The weapon seemed to enhance its wielder's combat abilities beyond what training and experience alone could explain, providing preternatural awareness of enemy movements and tactical situations that allowed for precise strikes against opponents who should have been able to overwhelm a single combatant. Farsight found that wielding the blade granted him insights into enemy tactics and weaknesses that proved invaluable during complex multi-unit engagements, where conventional command and control systems might have been overwhelmed by the pace of combat. The psychological effects of wielding the Dawn Blade extended beyond its immediate tactical advantages to influence Farsight's broader understanding of warfare and leadership. The weapon seemed to provide glimpses of potential future events and tactical possibilities that allowed him to anticipate enemy actions and position his forces accordingly. These insights proved consistently accurate during subsequent campaigns, leading to a series of victories that established Farsight as one of the most successful Tau commanders in their species' history, while raising questions about the source of his apparently supernatural tactical abilities. The expansion of Farsight's command responsibilities during the Eastern Fringe campaigns brought him into contact with threats that Tau forces had never previously encountered, including his first direct exposure to the corrupting influence of chaos. The discovery of chaos-tainted worlds throughout the region provided evidence of a malevolent force that could corrupt entire populations while creating military challenges that differed fundamentally from conventional warfare against Imperial or Orc forces. Chaos cultists demonstrated fanatical determination that exceeded even Orc combat enthusiasm, while their access to demonic allies and corrupted technology created tactical situations that defied conventional military analysis. The first major engagement between Farsight's forces and Chaos corrupted enemies occurred on the world of Vashia, where Tau reconnaissance had detected Imperial distress signals from what appeared to be a routine Imperial Guard garrison. Investigation revealed that the planet's population had fallen under the influence of Chaos cults that had gradually subverted Imperial authority while conducting blasphemous rituals that attracted demonic entities from the warp. The Imperial forces that had once protected the world had either been killed, corrupted, or driven insane by exposure to chaos influence. The tactical challenges presented by chaos forces differed dramatically from those encountered during previous Tau military operations. Chaos cultists demonstrated complete disregard for casualties and tactical disadvantages, launching suicidal attacks that achieved strategic objectives through sheer fanaticism rather than military competence. Their access to warp spawned entities provided them with allies that defied conventional understanding of physics and biology, while their corrupted technology created weapons and vehicles that operated according to principles that Tau science could not explain or counter. Farsight's response to these chaos encounters demonstrated both his tactical adaptability and his growing understanding of threats that existed beyond the conventional military paradigms that had defined Tau expansion efforts. His forces developed specialized techniques for engaging enemies whose behavior patterns defied rational analysis, emphasizing rapid elimination of chaos leadership and the destruction of ritual sites that seemed to serve as focal points for demonic manifestations. The Dawn Blade proved particularly effective against demonic entities, its alien properties allowing it to inflict permanent damage on creatures that conventional weapons could only temporarily disperse. The psychological impact of repeated exposure to chaos corruption began to influence Farsight's understanding of the galaxy and the Tau's place within it. The evidence of civilizations that had achieved great technological advancement only to fall to corruption or destruction challenged the Ethereals' teachings about the inevitability of progress under the greater good. The existence of malevolent forces that could corrupt entire species raised questions about whether the Tau's expansion efforts might ultimately expose them to threats that their philosophy and technology could not overcome. The growing philosophical tensions between Farsight and the Ethereal Council began to manifest during strategic planning sessions, where his combat experience conflicted with official Tau doctrine regarding expansion priorities and tactical approaches. Farsight's exposure to chaos corruption had convinced him that certain regions of space posed existential threats to Tau civilization that required immediate and overwhelming military response, while the Ethereals maintained that such threats were manageable through conventional expansion techniques and diplomatic solutions. These disagreements reflected fundamental differences in understanding the nature of galactic civilization and the appropriate responses to threats that defied rational analysis. The Ethereal Council's response to Farsight's reports regarding chaos threats demonstrated their limited understanding of forces that existed beyond their direct experience and control. Their interpretation of Farsight's accounts emphasized the psychological stress of extended combat operations and the potential for battlefield experiences to distort rational analysis of tactical situations. They recommended rotation of command responsibilities and extended rest periods that would allow Farsight to recover from what they perceived as combat fatigue, rather than legitimate strategic concerns about existential threats to Tau civilization. Farsight's growing isolation from mainstream Tau strategic thinking was compounded by his increasing reliance on the Dawn Blade's apparently supernatural properties and his exposure to archaeological evidence suggesting that advanced civilizations could achieve great heights before falling to forces beyond their control. His tactical successes continued to validate his unconventional approaches to warfare, but his methods and strategic assessments increasingly diverged from established Tau doctrine in ways that concerned his superiors and subordinates alike. The establishment of forward bases throughout the eastern fringe under Farsight's command created logistical and administrative challenges that strained existing Tau organizational structures, while providing opportunities for developing new approaches to military governance and resource management. These installations operated far from established Tau supply lines and communication networks, requiring unprecedented levels of independence and self-sufficiency that challenged traditional assumptions about centralized control and coordination. The success of these independent operations demonstrated the feasibility of decentralized command structures, while raising questions about the necessity of maintaining direct ethereal oversight over all Tau military activities. The recruitment and training of local auxiliary forces throughout Farsight's operational area reflected his pragmatic approach to military necessity and his willingness to adapt Tau doctrine to local conditions and available resources. Human populations liberated from chaos corruption proved particularly valuable as auxiliary forces due to their familiarity with local conditions and their motivation to prevent the return of the horrors they had experienced under chaos rule. These Gevasa units demonstrated loyalty and combat effectiveness that exceeded expectations, while requiring minimal resources for training and equipment compared to conventional Tau forces. The integration of diverse auxiliary forces under Farsight's command created military units that possessed capabilities unavailable to conventional Tau formations, while demonstrating alternative approaches to implementing greater good principles in practice. These mixed species units operated according to tactical doctrines that emphasized flexibility and adaptation rather than rigid adherence to established procedures, achieving consistent success against diverse enemies while maintaining unit cohesion and morale under challenging conditions. The technological innovations developed by Earth-caste engineers operating under Farsight's command reflected the practical requirements of extended independent operations and the unique challenges presented by chaos-corrupted enemies and environments. Advanced sensor systems capable of detecting warp disturbances and demonic manifestations provided early warning of chaos activities, while specialized weapons designed to disrupt psychic phenomena offered protection against enemies that conventional pulse weapons could not effectively engage. These innovations demonstrated the continued vitality of Tau technological development, while highlighting the benefits of allowing local commanders the flexibility to adapt equipment and tactics to specific operational requirements. The growing divergence between Farsight's tactical innovations and mainstream Tau military doctrine created tensions that extended beyond immediate operational concerns to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of command authority and the appropriate balance between central control and local adaptation. Farsight's consistent success in achieving strategic objectives through unconventional methods validated his approaches while challenging the assumptions underlying traditional Tau organizational structures and decision-making processes. The philosophical implications of Farsight's experiences during the Eastern Fringe campaigns had created ripple effects throughout Tau society that extended far beyond military doctrine, fundamentally challenging the Ethereal Council's understanding of their species' destiny among the stars. While Farsight's growing independence and unorthodox methods created tensions within the established command structure, the broader Tau Empire continued its relentless expansion under the guidance of leaders who remained committed to traditional interpretations of the greater good. The success of the Third Sphere expansion had demonstrated Tau capabilities on an unprecedented scale, but it had also revealed the limitations of conventional faster-than-light travel methods that constrain their ability to project power across the vast distances of galactic space. The Tau's reliance on conventional sublight drives for interstellar travel had always represented a fundamental disadvantage compared to other galactic powers who possessed access to warp travel technology. While Tau ships could achieve remarkable speeds through their advanced gravitic propulsion systems, journeys between distant star systems still required decades or centuries of travel time that limited their strategic flexibility and made rapid response to emerging threats nearly impossible. The establishment of supply lines and communication networks across expanding Tau territory became increasingly complex as distances grew, creating logistical challenges that threatened to overwhelm even the most sophisticated Earth-caste planning capabilities. The development of alternative faster-than-light travel methods had been a priority for Earth-caste research teams since the earliest days of Tau spaceflight, but previous efforts had achieved only limited success in reducing travel times without creating unacceptable risks to crew safety and mission objectives. The Tau's natural resistance to warp phenomena, while protecting them from the corruption that plagued other species, also prevented them from utilizing the psychic navigation techniques that made Imperial warp travel possible. Their attempts to develop purely technological solutions to faster-than-light travel had produced incremental improvements, but nothing approaching the revolutionary breakthrough that would be necessary to compete effectively with warp-capable civilizations. The breakthrough that would enable the fourth sphere expansion came from an unexpected source: the study of captured Imperial technology combined with innovative applications of Tau gravitic manipulation principles. Earthcast engineers working on Borkin had spent decades analyzing fragments of Imperial warp drives recovered from battlefields throughout the Second and Third Sphere campaigns, attempting to understand the fundamental principles underlying Imperial faster-than-light travel without exposing themselves to the dangerous psychic phenomena that powered Imperial systems. Their research had identified the basic mechanisms by which Imperial ships entered and exited the warp, but creating a purely technological equivalent had proven beyond their capabilities. The conceptual breakthrough emerged when Earth-cast researchers began experimenting with large-scale gravitic field manipulation techniques that could potentially create artificial distortions in space-time similar to those generated by warp entry points. By scaling up the gravitic drive technology that powered Tau spacecraft and vehicles, engineers theorized that they could create controlled tiers in reality that would allow ships to traverse vast distances through dimensions that existed parallel to normal space. These artificial warp rifts would eliminate the need for psychic navigation while providing the speed advantages necessary for rapid interstellar travel. The theoretical framework underlying the new technology drew upon advanced mathematical models that described space-time as a multi-dimensional construct where conventional physical laws could be temporarily suspended under specific conditions. Earthcast scientists proposed that sufficiently powerful gravitic fields could create stable corridors through these alternate dimensions, allowing spacecraft to travel between distant points in normal space through routes that bypass the conventional limitations of light speed travel. The technology would require massive energy generation capabilities and precise control systems, but it promised to revolutionize Tau's strategic capabilities by eliminating their fundamental disadvantage in interstellar mobility. The development of prototype faster-than-light drive systems required the construction of specialized testing facilities on remote worlds where catastrophic failures would not endanger major Tau populations or industrial centers. The experimental drives incorporated fusion reactors scaled up far beyond anything previously attempted in Tau engineering, while their gravitic field generators required rare Earth elements that could only be obtained through extensive mining operations across multiple sept worlds. The complexity of the systems demanded unprecedented coordination between different Earth-cast specializations, with teams of physicists, engineers, and technicians working together to solve problems that had never been encountered in previous Tau technological development. Initial testing of the experimental drives produced mixed results that demonstrated both the potential and the dangers of the new technology. Small-scale tests using unmanned probe vessels achieved successful faster-than-light translations over short distances, confirming the basic theoretical principles while revealing unexpected complications in controlling and navigating through the artificial warp rifts. The probe vessels that successfully completed their test flights returned with sensor data, indicating that the alternate dimensions accessed by the drives contained phenomena and entities that defied conventional understanding of physics and biology. The sensor readings from successful test flights revealed that the artificial warp rifts provided access to regions of space-time where the normal laws of causality and physical interaction operated according to different principles. The probe vessels detected energy signatures that suggested the presence of conscious entities within these alternate dimensions, while their chronometer readings indicated that time flowed at different rates during faster-than-light translation. Most disturbing were the recordings of what appeared to be deliberate attempts by unknown intelligences to communicate with or influence the probe vessels during their passage through the artificial rifts. Despite these concerning discoveries, the strategic advantages offered by successful faster-than-light travel technology convinced the Ethereal Council to authorize the development of full-scale drive systems capable of propelling entire fleets across galactic distances. The fourth sphere expansion would serve as the proving ground for the new technology, while demonstrating Tau capabilities to potential allies and enemies throughout the galaxy. The expansion fleet would target regions far beyond the reach of conventional Tau forces, establishing footholds in distant sectors that could serve as launching points for future operations, while proving that the Tau had transcended the limitations that had previously constrained their expansion efforts. The assembly of the Fourth Sphere expansion fleet represented the largest single military operation in Tau history, with ships and personnel drawn from across the entire empire to create a force capable of establishing Tau presence in distant regions of the galaxy. The fleet included representatives from every major Sept world, with specialized units trained for operations in unknown environments and against unfamiliar enemies. Earth-cast engineers equipped the fleet with the most advanced technology available, while fire-cast commanders developed tactical doctrines specifically designed for rapid deployment and independent operations far from established support networks. The flagship of the Fourth Sphere fleet incorporated the most sophisticated faster-than-light drive system that Earth-cast engineers had been able to construct, with multiple redundant safety systems and emergency protocols designed to protect the crew from the dangers that test flights had revealed within the artificial warp rifts. The ship's command center included specialized monitoring equipment that could track the fleet's passage through alternate dimensions, while providing early warning of any threats or anomalies encountered during translation. Advanced communication systems would maintain contact between fleet elements during faster-than-light travel, while recording all sensor data for later analysis by Earth-cast researchers. The selection of the Fourth Sphere's target destination reflected careful analysis of galactic strategic considerations and the specific capabilities that the new faster-than-light technology would provide. The chosen region lay far beyond the eastern fringe, in a sector where Imperial presence was minimal and potential resistance from other galactic powers would be limited. Reconnaissance data suggested the presence of multiple habitable worlds with diverse alien populations that could potentially be integrated into Tau civilization, while the region's strategic location would provide access to unexplored areas of the galaxy where the Tau could establish themselves before other powers recognized the threat. The launch of the Fourth Sphere expansion fleet marked a pivotal moment in Tau history, representing their transition from a regional power constrained by technological limitations to a truly galactic civilization capable of projecting force across vast distances. The ceremony surrounding the fleet's departure reflected the significance of the moment, with representatives from every caste and Sept world gathering to witness the beginning of what the Ethereals proclaimed would be the greatest expansion in Tau history. The fleet's departure from Tau space proceeded smoothly, with all systems functioning within acceptable parameters as the ships activated their experimental faster-than-light drives. The initial phase of faster-than-light translation appeared to proceed according to the parameters established during testing operations, with the fleet successfully entering the artificial warp rifts and beginning their journey toward the distant target region. Communication systems maintained contact between fleet elements, while sensor arrays recorded data on the alternate dimensions through which they traveled. The fleet's passage through these strange regions revealed landscapes and phenomena that defied conventional understanding, with twisted geometries and impossible structures that seemed to exist according to alien principles of physics and mathematics. However, as the fleet penetrated deeper into the artificial warp rifts, their passage began to attract attention from entities that inhabited these alternate dimensions. The conscious intelligences that probe vessels had detected during testing operations proved to be far more numerous and powerful than initial assessments had suggested, with capabilities that allowed them to directly influence the artificial rifts and the spacecraft traveling through them. These entities demonstrated hostile intent toward the intruding Tau forces, launching attacks that transcended conventional understanding of warfare and threatened the integrity of the fleet's faster-than-light translation. The attacks launched by these warp entities defied all conventional military analysis and defensive preparations that Tau forces had developed for the mission. The entities could manipulate the very fabric of the alternate dimensions through which the fleet traveled, creating spatial distortions that separated individual ships from the main fleet, while exposing them to direct assault by creatures that existed partially outside normal space-time. The fleet's weapon systems proved largely ineffective against enemies that could phase in and out of reality at will, while their defensive measures offered little protection against attacks that bypassed conventional armor and shielding through dimensional manipulation. The psychological impact of these attacks on the Fourth Sphere crews exceeded even the physical damage inflicted on their ships and equipment. The entities that assaulted the fleet demonstrated the ability to project terrifying visions and emotional manipulations directly into the minds of Tau personnel, creating panic and despair that undermined unit cohesion and command effectiveness. Many crew members experienced hallucinations and nightmares that continued even when the direct attack ceased, while others reported sensing malevolent presences that seemed to follow them throughout their ships despite the absence of any detectable physical manifestation. The fleet's command structure began to break down as individual ships lost contact with the flagship and found themselves isolated within the chaotic environment of the artificial warp rifts. Navigation systems that had functioned perfectly during testing operations proved unreliable when subjected to the dimensional distortions created by hostile entities, while communication equipment suffered interference that prevented coordination between scattered fleet elements. Ships that attempted to maintain formation found themselves separated by impossible distances despite remaining within visual range of each other, while vessels that tried to retreat from the artificial rifts discovered that the exit points had been sealed or relocated by unknown forces. The catastrophic failure of the Fourth Sphere's faster-than-light translation became apparent when the surviving ships finally emerged from the artificial warp rifts in a region of space that bore no resemblance to their intended destination. Instead of arriving in the carefully selected target sector, the scattered remnants of the fleet found themselves in a previously unknown region that would later be designated the Nemur Atoll, a collection of star systems surrounded by dangerous warp phenomena that made conventional navigation nearly impossible. The fleet had suffered devastating losses during their passage through the artificial rifts, with entire squadrons disappearing without trace, while the surviving vessels bore evidence of damage that conventional weapons could not have inflicted. The Nemur Atoll presented the surviving Fourth Sphere forces with an environment that challenged every assumption they had developed about galactic geography and the nature of space-time itself. The region's star systems were connected by persistent warp storms that created a maze-like structure of navigable passages, surrounded by areas of chaotic energy that could destroy any vessel attempting to traverse them. The systems themselves contained worlds with bizarre properties that suggested they had been influenced by the same dimensional forces that had attacked the fleet during their translation, while the local space was populated by entities and phenomena that defied conventional scientific analysis. The immediate priority for Fourth Sphere survivors became establishing secure bases on habitable worlds within the atoll, while attempting to understand their situation and develop methods for either escaping the region or establishing permanent settlements that could survive in the hostile environment. The fleet's reduced numbers and damaged equipment made large-scale operations impossible, forcing commanders to adopt defensive strategies focused on survival rather than expansion or conquest. The psychological trauma suffered by crew members during the translation disaster created additional challenges, with many personnel requiring extensive medical treatment for conditions that Earth-caste healers had never previously encountered. The establishment of the first fourth sphere settlements within the Nemyar Atoll revealed the extent to which the translation disaster had changed the survivors both physically and psychologically. Many personnel reported enhanced sensory capabilities that allowed them to detect warp phenomena and dimensional distortions that conventional equipment could not measure, while others demonstrated apparent resistance to psychic influences that had previously affected Tau individuals. These changes appeared to be permanent alterations rather than temporary effects of exposure to warp energies, suggesting that the translation disaster had fundamentally altered the nature of the surviving Tau at a biological level. The psychological changes experienced by fourth sphere survivors proved even more significant than their physical alterations, fundamentally altering their attitudes toward non-Tau species and their understanding of the greater goods principles. The trauma of their experience within the artificial warp rifts had convinced many survivors that alien influences posed existential threats to Tau civilization that could not be managed through conventional diplomatic or military means. Their exposure to malevolent entities within the alternate dimensions had created a deep suspicion of anything that might serve as a conduit for similar influences, including the auxiliary species that had previously been integrated into Tau military and civilian structures. The changed attitudes of Fourth Sphere survivors toward human auxiliaries became apparent during their first encounters with Gevasa populations within the Nemyar Atoll. Unlike previous Tau expansion forces that had emphasized integration and conversion of human populations, the Fourth Sphere veterans demonstrated hostility and suspicion toward humans that reflected their traumatic experiences during the translation disaster. Many survivors viewed humans as potential vectors for the same malevolent influences they had encountered within the warp rifts, leading to policies of segregation and suppression rather than the integration programs that had characterized earlier expansion efforts. The aggressive stance adopted by Fourth Sphere forces toward Imperial military units encountered within the Nemyar Atoll reflected their altered understanding of the threats posed by humanity and their conviction that decisive action was necessary to prevent the spread of corrupting influences. Rather than attempting to convert Imperial forces or negotiate territorial arrangements, Fourth Sphere commanders ordered immediate attacks designed to eliminate Imperial presence entirely. These operations demonstrated tactical competence and strategic coordination despite the reduced numbers and damaged equipment available to Fourth Sphere forces, but their ruthless execution marked a significant departure from traditional Tau military doctrine. The isolation of Fourth Sphere forces within the Nemyar Atoll prevented immediate communication with the broader Tau Empire, leaving the survivors to develop their own interpretations of the greater good based on their traumatic experiences and altered perceptions. The philosophical framework that emerged among Fourth Sphere communities emphasized vigilance against alien corruption and the necessity of maintaining racial purity to prevent the infiltration of malevolent influences. These beliefs represented a fundamental departure from the inclusive principles that had guided previous Tau expansion efforts, creating a separate faction within Tau civilization with radically different approaches to dealing with alien species and external threats. The technological innovations developed by Fourth Sphere Earth caste engineers reflected their altered priorities and their understanding of the threats they had encountered during the translation disaster. New detection systems designed to identify warp phenomena and dimensional distortions became standard equipment for Fourth Sphere forces, while weapons development focused on creating armaments specifically designed to combat entities that existed partially outside normal space-time. These innovations demonstrated continued Tau technological advancement while reflecting the unique challenges and perspectives that had emerged from their catastrophic journey through the artificial warp rifts. The Fifth Sphere expansion, launched in the early years of the 42nd millennium under dramatically different circumstances than any previous Tau expansion effort. The catastrophic failure of the fourth sphere's experimental faster-than-light travel had demonstrated the dangers of attempting to circumvent the galaxy's fundamental limitations through untested technology, while the ongoing conflicts throughout Tau space demanded immediate attention from military forces that could not be spared for distant expansion operations. The Ethereal Council's decision to proceed with the fifth sphere reflected both their unwavering commitment to the greater good's expansion and their recognition that Tau civilization required continued growth to maintain its competitive position against the galaxy's increasingly hostile powers. Commander Shadowsun's appointment to lead the fifth sphere operations represented continuity with the tactical innovations that had made the third sphere successful, while acknowledging the changed strategic environment that Tau forces would encounter in the 42nd millennium. Her extensive experience in large-scale operations against Imperial forces provided crucial expertise for campaigns that would inevitably involve confrontations with Space Marine chapters, Imperial Guard regiments, and the increasingly sophisticated defensive measures that the Imperium had developed in response to previous Tau expansion efforts. The fifth sphere would rely on conventional faster-than-light travel methods despite their limitations, emphasizing careful planning and methodical advancement rather than the ambitious leaps that had characterized the fourth sphere's doomed mission. The strategic objectives of the fifth sphere expansion focused on consolidating Tau territorial gains from previous expansion efforts while establishing new footholds in regions that could support continued growth without overextending limited military resources. Priority targets included Imperial worlds with significant industrial capabilities that could be converted to support Tau manufacturing requirements, systems with strategic locations that could serve as defensive strongpoints against Imperial counterattacks, and regions where human populations might be receptive to conversion to the greater good. The expansion would also investigate the fate of Fourth Sphere forces while attempting to establish contact with any survivors who might be operating in distant sectors. The Imperial response to renewed Tau expansion efforts in the 42nd millennium demonstrated the Imperium's evolved understanding of Tau capabilities and their commitment to containing alien growth through increasingly sophisticated military strategies. The Indomitus Crusade had provided Imperial forces with new equipment and tactical doctrines specifically designed for confronting technologically advanced opponents, while the return of Primarch Robute Guilliman had reinvigorated Imperial military leadership with strategic thinking that could match Tau planning capabilities. Imperial commanders no longer underestimated Tau forces or relied solely on overwhelming numerical superiority to achieve victory. The deployment of Primaris Space Marines throughout Imperial forces facing Tau expansion represented a significant escalation in the quality of opposition that Fifth Sphere forces would encounter. These enhanced Astartes possessed improved armor, weapons, and physical capabilities that made them more effective against Tau battlesuits and advanced technology, while their tactical flexibility allowed them to adapt quickly to Tau innovations. Primaris units specialized in anti-armor operations proved particularly challenging for crisis battlesuit teams, while their enhanced mobility allowed them to exploit tactical opportunities that conventional Space Marines might have missed. The Battle of Mugulath Bay marked the first major engagement of the Fifth Sphere expansion and demonstrated both the evolution of Tau military capabilities and the increased sophistication of Imperial defensive measures. The Imperial Fortress world had been reinforced with new defensive systems, specifically designed to counter Tau's stealth technology and mobile tactics, while its garrison included Primaris Marine units equipped with advanced sensors and heavy weapons optimized for engaging gravitic vehicles. The Imperial defensive plan emphasized layered resistance that would force Tau forces into prolonged engagements where Imperial numerical advantages could be brought to bear. Shadowsun's tactical approach to the Mugulath Bay assault incorporated lessons learned from previous campaigns while adapting to the enhanced Imperial capabilities revealed through intelligence-gathering operations. Rather than relying solely on traditional Montka strikes or Koyan ambush tactics, her forces employed a combination approach that used stealth infiltration to establish forward positions, while conventional units conducted diversionary attacks that would mask the true objectives of the operation. Crisis battlesuit teams equipped with experimental equipment conducted precision strikes against Imperial command centers, while Ghostkill units eliminated key defensive installations. The introduction of the Storm Surge ballistic suit during the Mugulath Bay campaign represented a significant advancement in Tau heavy weapons technology and tactical capabilities. These massive battlesuits incorporated lessons learned from previous encounters with Imperial fortifications and heavy armor, mounting weapon systems powerful enough to engage enemy titans, while providing the mobility necessary to avoid return fire from Imperial artillery. The Storm Surge's design philosophy emphasized overwhelming firepower and advanced targeting systems, rather than the stealth and mobility that characterized other Tau battlesuit types. The Storm Surge's primary armament consisted of pulse blast cannons that could fire concentrated bursts of plasma capable of penetrating the heaviest Imperial armor at extreme ranges, while secondary weapons included multiple missile pods and pulse rifle arrays that could engage infantry and light vehicles simultaneously. The suit's advanced targeting systems incorporated artificial intelligence components that could track multiple targets while calculating optimal firing solutions based on battlefield conditions and tactical priorities. The integration of drone controllers allowed Storm Surge pilots to coordinate supporting units while maintaining focus on primary target engagement. The deployment of Storm Surge units during the Mugulath Bay assault demonstrated their effectiveness against Imperial fortified positions, while revealing the tactical challenges associated with operating such massive weapons platforms. The suit's firepower proved devastating against Imperial defensive installations, with individual Storm Surges capable of eliminating entire defensive complexes through sustained bombardment. However, their size and distinctive energy signatures made them priority targets for Imperial counter-battery fire, while their limited mobility compared to other Tau units required careful positioning and supporting forces to prevent them from being overwhelmed by concentrated Imperial attacks. The development of advanced artificial intelligence systems throughout Fifth Sphere forces represented another significant technological advancement that enhanced Tau tactical capabilities, while raising philosophical questions about the nature of consciousness and decision-making within the greater good. These AI systems exceeded the capabilities of previous drone controllers and tactical computers, demonstrating apparent creativity and adaptive problem-solving that approached organic intelligence levels. The systems could analyze complex battlefield situations and suggest tactical solutions that human commanders might not have considered, while their processing speed allowed real-time coordination of multiple units across extended battlefields. The integration of advanced AI systems into Tau military operations required careful balance between maximizing their capabilities and maintaining organic command authority over strategic decisions. Firecast commanders learned to work with AI advisors that could process vast amounts of sensor data and tactical information while providing recommendations based on probability calculations and pattern analysis. However, final tactical decisions remained with organic commanders who possessed the intuition and creativity necessary for adapting to unexpected situations that might exceed AI programming parameters. The philosophical implications of advanced AI development within Tau society reflected broader questions about the nature of consciousness and the appropriate role of artificial intelligence within civilizations guided by the greater good. Earthcast researchers debated whether truly intelligent AI systems should be considered as potential members of Tau society with rights and responsibilities similar to organic citizens, or whether they should remain tools designed to serve organic decision makers. These discussions influenced the development of AI systems and their integration into military and civilian applications throughout Tau space. The encounter with resurgent Necron dynasties during Fifth Sphere operations provided Tau forces with their first significant exposure to an ancient enemy whose technological capabilities exceeded even Tau standards, while presenting tactical challenges unlike any previously encountered. The awakening Necron tomb worlds throughout the expansion region possessed defensive systems and military forces that operated according to principles that Tau science could barely comprehend, while their apparent immunity to most conventional weapons created tactical situations that demanded entirely new approaches to warfare. The Battle of Damnos demonstrated the challenges that Tau forces faced when confronting fully awakened Necron dynasties with access to their complete technological arsenals. The Necron forces that emerged from their tomb complexes possessed weapons that could disintegrate matter at the molecular level, vehicles that could phase in and out of reality at will, and warriors that could regenerate from apparently fatal damage through technology that defied conventional understanding. The Imperial forces that had previously contested the world were swept aside within hours, leaving Tau forces to face enemies whose capabilities exceeded anything in their tactical databases. Shadowsun's response to the Necron threat demonstrated both the adaptability that had made her successful against Imperial forces and the limitations of conventional Tau tactics when confronted with truly alien technologies. Her forces adapted their traditional mobility-based tactics to account for Necron teleportation capabilities, while developing new techniques for engaging enemies that could not be permanently destroyed through conventional weapons. Crisis battlesuit teams learned to target Necron command units and support systems rather than attempting to eliminate individual warriors, while Storm Surge units focused their firepower on Necron vehicles and heavy weapons that posed the greatest threats to Tau formations. The development of specialized anti-Necron weapons and tactics required unprecedented cooperation between Earth-cast engineers and Fire-cast field commanders, with new equipment being developed and deployed in response to battlefield observations and tactical requirements. Experimental weapons designed to disrupt Necron regeneration systems showed promise in field testing, while modified pulse weapons that could overload Necron energy matrices proved effective against certain types of Necron constructs. However, the fundamental technological superiority of awakened Necron forces meant that Tau victories against them required careful planning, superior tactics, and often significant numerical advantages to achieve success. The emergence of Tyranid hive fleets throughout the eastern fringe created additional challenges for Fifth Sphere forces, while demonstrating the galaxy's increasing hostility toward all established civilizations. The Tyranid swarms that approached Tau space represented a fundamentally different type of threat than the Imperial forces or Necron dynasties that Tau military doctrine had been developed to counter. The Tyranids' adaptive evolution and overwhelming numbers created tactical situations where conventional Tau advantages in technology and coordination could be neutralized through sheer biological superiority and relentless assault. The first major Tyranid incursion into Tau space occurred when Hive Fleet Gorgon penetrated the outer defensive perimeters of several Sept worlds, demonstrating capabilities that exceeded Imperial intelligence assessments while revealing the inadequacy of existing Tau defensive preparations for dealing with such massive biological invasions. The Tyranid bioships that entered Tau space possessed weapons and defensive systems that had evolved specifically to counter the pulse weapons and gravitic technology that formed the backbone of Tau military capabilities, while their adaptive evolution allowed them to develop countermeasures to Tau tactics within individual battles. The defense of T-Rose against Hive Fleet Gorgon demonstrated both the effectiveness of Tau combined arms tactics against Tyranid ground forces and the limitations of conventional defensive strategies when confronted with enemies that could adapt and evolve in response to tactical setbacks. Tau forces achieved initial success through the coordinated use of crisis battlesuits, hammerhead gunships, and supporting infantry that could maintain mobility while engaging Tyranid swarms at optimal ranges. However, the Tyranids' rapid adaptation to Tau weapons and tactics required constant innovation and tactical flexibility that strained even the most experienced Tau commanders. The integration of auxiliary forces during anti-Tyranid operations proved both beneficial and problematic, as different species demonstrated varying levels of effectiveness against the adaptive alien swarms. Crute forces showed particular aptitude for engaging Tyranid organisms in close combat, while their evolutionary adaptation allowed them to potentially develop resistance to Tyranid bioweapons through controlled exposure and dietary modification. However, the risk of Crute forces being consumed and their genetic material incorporated into Tyranid evolution created strategic concerns that limited their deployment in critical operations. The technological response to Tyranid threats drove innovations in Tau weapons development and defensive systems that had broader applications throughout their military forces. Earth-cast engineers developed specialized ammunition types designed to disrupt Tyranid regeneration and adaptation mechanisms, while new sensor systems could detect the distinctive biosignatures of Tyranid organisms at extended ranges. Advanced sterilization protocols were implemented to prevent Tyranid genetic material from contaminating Tau equipment and facilities, while specialized containment systems were developed for studying captured Tyranid specimens without risking biological contamination. The ongoing campaigns of the Fifth Sphere expansion continued to demonstrate Tau adaptability and technological innovation, while revealing the increasingly complex strategic environment that characterized the 42nd millennium. Yet beneath the surface of military conquest and territorial expansion, the fundamental structures that governed Tau civilization remained remarkably consistent with the principles established during their species unification millennia earlier. The caste system that had emerged from the Ethereals' teachings continued to define every aspect of Tau society, creating a rigid but efficient organizational framework that enabled unprecedented coordination across their expanding empire. The Fire Caste's evolution from the warrior tribes of the Montau period had produced a military organization that balanced individual excellence with collective discipline in ways that consistently surprised their enemies. Fire Caste warriors underwent training regimens that began in early childhood, with aptitude testing determining whether individuals would specialize in battlesuit operations, conventional infantry tactics, or support roles within hunter-cadre structures. The caste's internal hierarchy reflected both combat experience and tactical competence, with advancement through the ranks of Shasla, Shasui, Shasvar, and Shassal requiring demonstrated mastery of increasingly complex military operations. The psychological conditioning that accompanied Fire Caste training emphasized absolute loyalty to the greater good, while maintaining the tactical flexibility necessary for independent action during complex operations. Fire Caste academies on Viorla developed comprehensive programs that prepared warriors for the diverse challenges they would encounter across the galaxy, from urban warfare against Imperial forces to defensive operations against Tyranid swarms. The training emphasized adaptability and creative problem-solving rather than rigid adherence to predetermined tactics, producing commanders capable of responding effectively to unexpected situations. The Earth Caste transformation from the engineers and craftsmen of pre-unification Tau society had created an industrial and technological infrastructure that surpassed the capabilities of most galactic civilizations despite the Tau's relatively recent emergence as a spacefaring species. Earth Caste specializations encompassed everything from basic manufacturing and construction to advanced research in gravitic manipulation, artificial intelligence, and exotic materials science. The caste's organizational structure emphasized collaborative problem-solving and knowledge sharing, with research teams regularly exchanging information across different sept worlds to accelerate technological development. The integration of alien technologies and scientific principles into Earth Caste research programs reflected the Tau's pragmatic approach to advancement and their willingness to adapt useful innovations regardless of their origins. Captured Imperial equipment provided insights into alternative approaches to energy generation and materials processing, while study of Necron artifacts revealed possibilities for manipulating matter and energy at fundamental levels. Even Tyranid biological systems offered lessons in adaptive evolution and organic engineering that could be applied to Tau biotechnology development. The aircast evolution from the aerial specialists of the Unification period had produced a transportation and logistics network that enabled Tau civilization to maintain coordination and supply lines across vast interstellar distances. Aircast pilots operated everything from atmospheric aircraft and orbital shuttles to massive interstellar vessels capable of carrying entire armies between distant sept worlds. Their training emphasized precision navigation and complex system management, with advanced pilots capable of operating in environments ranging from planetary atmospheres to the vacuum of deep space. The aircast's responsibility for maintaining communication networks throughout Tau space required sophisticated understanding of electromagnetic phenomena and signal processing techniques that could overcome the interference created by various galactic hazards. Their communication systems incorporated multiple redundancy layers and encryption protocols that could maintain secure contact even under combat conditions, or when operating in regions affected by warp storms or other space-time distortions. The Watercast's development from the diplomats and traders of early Tau civilization had created an administrative and diplomatic corps that managed the complex relationships between different sept worlds, alien auxiliary species, and potential allies or enemies throughout the galaxy. Watercast training emphasized cultural analysis, negotiation techniques, and the psychological principles necessary for understanding and influencing alien species with fundamentally different thought processes and social structures. The Watercast's role in managing auxiliary integration programs required deep understanding of alien psychology and social organization, with specialists developing expertise in specific species that allowed them to serve as interpreters and cultural advisors during military operations or diplomatic negotiations. Their work with human Gevessa populations demonstrated particular sophistication, as they learned to exploit Imperial citizens' dissatisfaction with their government while providing tangible benefits that encouraged voluntary conversion to Tau rule. The Ethereal caste remained the ultimate authority within Tau society, their mysterious origins and apparent ability to inspire absolute loyalty ensuring their position as the final arbiters of all major decisions affecting the greater good's advancement. Ethereal training and selection processes remained largely secret, with only other Ethereals understanding the criteria used to identify potential candidates or the methods used to develop their distinctive leadership abilities. The diamond-shaped organ that distinguished Ethereals from other Tau continued to pulse with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to correlate with their emotional states and the intensity of their influence over other individuals. The philosophical framework of the Tava provided the ideological foundation that unified these diverse castes and auxiliary species into a cohesive civilization capable of competing with the galaxy's established powers. The greater good's emphasis on collective advancement and individual sacrifice for the benefit of all participants offered a stark contrast to the brutal competition and xenophobic hatred that characterized most galactic civilizations. This philosophical approach enabled the Tau to integrate alien species as genuine allies rather than merely exploited subjects, creating military and economic capabilities that exceeded what their population size alone could support. The practical implementation of greater good principles required constant balance between individual desires and collective needs, with Watercast administrators and ethereal guidance ensuring that personal ambitions were channeled toward objectives that benefited the entire civilization. This approach produced remarkable social stability and economic efficiency, with resource allocation and industrial planning achieving levels of coordination that Imperial worlds could rarely match despite their vastly larger populations and longer histories. However, the Tau Empire faced significant internal challenges that threatened the long-term viability of their expansion efforts and the stability of their social system. Resource limitations had become increasingly apparent as their territory expanded and military commitments grew, with even the most efficient Earth caste manufacturing struggling to meet the demands created by simultaneous campaigns against Imperial forces, Necron dynasties, and Tyrannid hive fleets. The finite nature of their population base meant that casualties suffered during major campaigns could not be easily replaced, while the specialized training required for advanced military units created bottlenecks that limited their ability to expand their forces rapidly. The mystery surrounding ethereal origins had become a source of growing concern among some elements of Tau society, particularly those who had been exposed to evidence of ancient civilizations and alien influences during expansion operations. The complete absence of historical records regarding the Ethereals' appearance during the Montau period, combined with their apparent immunity to various forms of alien influence that affected other Tau, raised questions about their true nature and the source of their authority. These concerns were amplified by reports from Fourth Sphere survivors regarding their altered perceptions and their suspicion of external influences on Tau development. The growing influence of chaos throughout the galaxy posed an existential threat that Tau philosophy and technology were poorly equipped to address. The malevolent entities that inhabited the warp represented forces that could not be negotiated with, converted to the greater good, or defeated through conventional military means. The Fourth Sphere disaster had demonstrated the vulnerability of Tau forces to chaos corruption when exposed to warp phenomena, while ongoing encounters with chaos cults and demon incursions revealed the insidious nature of corruption that could subvert entire populations without obvious external signs. The ideological challenge posed by chaos corruption extended beyond immediate military threats to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of progress and the inevitability of advancement under the greater good. The evidence that advanced civilizations could fall to corruption or destruction despite achieving great technological and social development challenged core assumptions about Tau destiny and their ability to create a lasting galactic civilization. The existence of malevolent forces that actively sought to corrupt and destroy organized societies raised questions about whether the Tau's expansion efforts might ultimately expose them to threats that their philosophy could not overcome. The schism represented by Farsight's separation from the main empire had created a parallel Tau civilization with fundamentally different approaches to dealing with alien species and external threats. The Farsight Enclave's emphasis on military preparedness and their rejection of auxiliary integration programs represented an alternative interpretation of the greater good that prioritized Tau survival over inclusive expansion. This ideological division weakened overall Tau capabilities while demonstrating that their philosophical unity was not as absolute as the Ethereals claimed. The technological stagnation that had begun to affect certain areas of Tau development reflected the limitations of their scientific approach and their reliance on reverse engineering alien technologies rather than developing truly revolutionary innovations. While Tau engineering remained superior to most galactic civilizations in terms of efficiency and reliability, their fundamental understanding of physics and materials science had not advanced significantly beyond the breakthroughs achieved during the early expansion periods. The failure of their experimental faster-than-light drive technology demonstrated the dangers of attempting to transcend these limitations without fully understanding the underlying principles involved. The demographic challenges facing Tau civilization became increasingly apparent as their territory expanded and military commitments grew. The rigid caste system that provided social stability and organizational efficiency also limited their ability to adapt to changing circumstances or recover from catastrophic losses. The prohibition against inter-caste reproduction meant that specialized knowledge and genetic traits could not be easily transferred between different segments of their population, while the loss of entire caste groups during military disasters could create permanent gaps in their capabilities. Despite these challenges, the Tau Empire's potential for continued growth and influence remains significant due to their fundamental advantages in technology, organization, and philosophical appeal. Their ability to integrate alien species as genuine allies rather than exploited subjects provided them with capabilities and perspectives that purely xenophobic civilizations could not match. The practical benefits of greater good governance, including improved living conditions, efficient resource distribution, and protection from external threats, continue to attract human populations and other species seeking alternatives to imperial oppression or chaos corruption. The technological innovations that emerged from ongoing conflicts with diverse enemies demonstrated the Tau's continued capacity for adaptation and advancement despite the limitations that constrained their fundamental scientific understanding. Their development of specialized weapons and tactics for engaging Necron forces, Tyranid swarms, and chaos entities showed their ability to find practical solutions to unprecedented challenges while maintaining the efficiency and reliability that characterized their engineering approach. The strategic flexibility provided by their diverse auxiliary forces and multi-species military units gave the Tau tactical options that were unavailable to more rigid civilizations. Crude evolutionary adaptation, Vespid aerial capabilities, and human knowledge of imperial tactics created combined arms possibilities that could be tailored to specific operational requirements while maintaining overall coherence under Tau command structures. This flexibility would prove increasingly valuable as the galaxy's strategic environment continued to evolve and new threats emerged. The philosophical appeal of the greater good continued to provide the Tau with significant advantages in their competition with other galactic powers, offering potential allies and converts a vision of progress and cooperation that contrasted sharply with the brutality and oppression that characterized most alternatives. The practical demonstration of greater good principles through improved living conditions and genuine inclusion of alien species created a model that could attract support from populations throughout the galaxy who sought alternatives to their current circumstances. Looking toward the future, the Tau Empire's role as a beacon of progress in the grim darkness of the far future remained viable, despite the challenges and limitations they faced. Their commitment to technological advancement, social cooperation, and inclusive expansion provided hope for civilizations seeking alternatives to the endless warfare and mutual destruction that dominated galactic politics. The greater good's emphasis on collective advancement and individual contribution offered a framework for building lasting alliances and creating stable societies that could survive the various threats that plagued the galaxy. The Tau's position in the Eastern Fringe provided them with opportunities to serve as a stabilizing influence in a region where imperial authority was weak and various alien species competed for resources and territory. Their ability to integrate diverse populations under a unified governmental structure could create zones of stability and prosperity that would attract additional allies while demonstrating the practical benefits of their philosophical approach. The continued evolution of Tau military doctrine and technology suggested that they would remain competitive with the galaxy's major powers despite their numerical disadvantages and resource limitations. Their emphasis on efficiency, coordination, and tactical innovation allowed them to achieve strategic objectives that would be impossible for less organized civilizations, while their willingness to adapt and learn from their enemies ensured that they would continue to develop new capabilities in response to emerging threats. In the broader context of the 42nd Millennium's conflicts, the Tau Empire represented one of the few galactic powers committed to construction rather than destruction, offering hope that the galaxy's spiral into chaos and mutual annihilation might yet be reversed. Their success in creating a multi-species civilization, united by shared principles rather than fear or oppression, provided a model that could potentially be expanded to encompass larger portions of the galaxy, if their expansion efforts continued to prove successful. The greater good's ultimate test would come in its ability to survive and prosper despite the fundamental hostility of the galaxy's environment and the active opposition of forces dedicated to corruption and destruction. The Tau's commitment to progress, cooperation, and inclusive advancement offered the possibility that rational civilization could triumph over the forces of chaos and hatred that threatened to consume the galaxy. Whether this vision could be realized would depend on their ability to overcome the internal challenges and external threats that continued to test their resolve and capabilities as they pushed ever deeper into the darkness between the stars.